Chapter 701. The cultivators of all sects in Japan looked at the young and handsome man in front of them with complicated eyes. Se Xingguang put his hands on his chest and laughed. He really came. He finally came. Se Chuyun's eyes, which had been drooping, also raised at this time. She stared at Li Yundong with bright eyes, and a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Finally, it's getting interesting. Se Xingguang said to Sanji Tsunekatsu in a low voice, "Go and call Takahashi Shota down. He can't fight anymore. In his current state, if he fights with Li Yundong, he will definitely lose." Sanji Tsunekatsu was stunned for a moment. He glanced at Se Xingguang and then shouted to Takahashi Shota, "Takahashi, how about you come down and have a rest for a while?" Although Takahashi Shota didn't know Li Yundong, he clearly heard the whispers of the cultivators of all sects in Japan. His eyes flashed with a strange fanatical light, and he thought to himself, "Is this the famous Li Wudi of China? Well, if I kill him, I will be the most famous person in the Japanese cultivation world." Takahashi Shota didn't seem to hear Sanji Tsunekatsu's voice. He smiled grimly, picked up the Zen knife in his hand, pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, "You are Li Yundong? Well, come up and die." Takahashi Shota was furious. He raised his knife and slashed at Li Yundong's back. This knife was extremely fierce, and in an instant, a deep ditch was cut on the ground. The people on the sidelines suddenly cried out in alarm. "Shameless! Be careful! Despicable man, how dare you sneak attack!" Li Yundong seemed to have eyes on his back. His hands quickly pinched a 9th-level rebirth seal, turned around and slapped his head. Boom! Takahashi Shota's blade aura struck the glittering rank 9 rebirth seal and suddenly shattered. However, the rank 9 rebirth seal didn't stop. It was like a huge golden palm that rushed towards Takahashi Shota. Takahashi Shota was shocked. He leaped and narrowly dodged the palm. But even so, his Zen blade was brushed by the golden palm, and half of his arm went numb. Takahashi Shota was horrified. He knew that his Zen saber was specialized in breaking the body protection jinshin of all sections. Once the saber gang was used, it could break everything. However, after fighting with Li Yunyan's Mahamudra, Li Yunyang didn't move at all, while his saber gang was like a piece of paper. What was going on? If he hadn't dodged in time, he would have been slapped so hard that he wouldn't even be able to see his body. Takahashi Shota had won all the battles in a row, so he had naturally become arrogant and underestimated his enemy. At this time he saw Li Yunyang throw a palm strike, glanced at him indifferently, and then turned around as if he didn't take him seriously. Takahashi Shota was shocked and angry, but he didn't dare to attack again for a while. At this time Sanji Tsunekatsu shouted, "Takahashi, come down. You are no match for him." Shota Takahashi didn't wait for him to finish. He turned his head and shouted with a ferocious face, "Shut up. I will definitely defeat him." After that, he gently wiped the blood on the Zen saber with his fingers. Then he took out 2 talismans from his bosom with his blood-stained fingers, pasted one on the Shan acupoint on his chest and the other on the Shinting acupoint on his forehead. He began to recite the incantation quickly. Li Yunyang didn't even look at him. Instead, he turned around and smiled at Zhou Qin, who was beside him. "Aren't you supposed to protect me? Why are you all here?" Zhou Qin looked at Li Yunyang in surprise. Although the situation in front of her was critical and dangerous, her heart was calm. It seemed that as long as the man in front of her was there, even if the sky fell down, he would be able to hold it up with one arm. Zhou Qin pursed her lips and said with a slight smile, "Didn't we leave a note?" Li Yunyang smiled and said, "I know, but there are only a few words on your note, and they are written like crazy cursive. How can I know what's going on?" At this time Su-chan also rushed over. She put her arms around Li Yunyang's arm as if there was no one else around and said intimately, "Yundong, why did you come so quickly? We've just arrived and you're already here." Li Yunyang patted her gently on the arm and said softly, "I was worried about you. When I woke up, I found that there was no one in the room. Oh my god, it really scared me." Su-chan said in surprise, "No way? Where are 5th Shirbua and 6th Shirbua? We didn't leave until they came." Li Yunyang was stunned. "Lu Yuehong and Zhuang Yiting are here too? I didn't see them." Su-chan and Zhou Qin looked at each other. Zhou Qin said, "Master, they did come. If they hadn't said that they would protect you, we wouldn't have dared to leave at all." Li Yunyang was secretly surprised. He thought for a while and said in a low voice, "Maybe something happened to them. Forget it, let's not worry about it now. Where's Ziyuan? Is she okay?" Su-chan raised her hand and said to Ziyuan, who had been outside the field, "Sister Ziyuan is fine. She's over there. Li Yundong looked in the direction of Su Chan's finger and saw that Ziyuan was standing on the sidelines, staring at him. He and Ziyuan looked at each other and smiled at the same time. Although they didn't say a word to each other, there was a tacit understanding between them. Seeing that the other was safe and sound, they both put down their worries. Li Yundong nodded slightly to Ziyuan and asked Zhou Qin, "What's going on here? Why is there blood everywhere?" Su Chan was quick to talk and rushed to tell him what had happened here. When Li Yundong heard that the Japanese had suddenly come here, he laughed and said, "It turns out that they are here to get revenge." Li Yundong glanced at the cultivators of the Japanese sects and saw that there were many masters there. The masters of all sects were staring at him angrily. With so many masters staring at him at the same time, the power was indescribable. If it had been anyone else, they would have been crushed by the pressure of this gaze. However, Li Yundong just smiled coldly. When his eyes swept over Sanjitsu Nakatsu, he was surprised and his eyes burst out with a flash of light. Li Yundong stared at Sanjitsu Nakatsu, patted Zhou Qin and Su Chan on the shoulder and said, "Let's go down first. You don't have to fight." When the three of them walked to the side of the field, Zhou Qin rushed to say, "Master, let me fight this battle. Don't tell me I can't even defeat an injured monk?" Li Yundong looked back and saw that at this time, the two talismans on Takahashi Shota's chest and forehead were constantly emitting bursts of golden light. These lights lingered in front of him, making him look as if he was plated with a layer of gold powder. His originally ferocious and terrible murderous aura also became solemn and dignified. Li Yundong narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a low voice, "Just now, you said that each sect can only send one person. Of course it should be me. It can be said that all this happened because of me, so naturally I should bear the responsibility." Zhou Qin opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she saw that Takahashi Shota's momentum was strong at this time. His whole body was like a golden Buddha, which was daunting. She also knew that if she won it would be easy. If she lost, then Li Yundong could only watch. If she forced herself to fight, it would definitely cause a big fight between the two sections. Obviously, there were many masters in the Japanese cultivation world. Once they fought together, it was very likely that they would be defeated. Thinking of this, Zhou Qin swallowed her words and said with concern, "Master, you have to be careful." At this time, Ziyuan also said in a low voice, "Li Yundong, be careful. This is the monk soldier of the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land sect. He is very fierce." Zhang Kongyun and Zhang Huashui were both defeated by him. Li Yundong's heart trembled slightly. Ruan Hongling, who was beside him, gritted her teeth and said, "This evil monk is vicious. He has already killed 2 cultivators of our Hua Taoist family, and he didn't even let go of the Yang spirit. Li Yundong, don't show any mercy." When Li Yundong heard this, he was furious. Only then did he understand what was going on with the blood on the ground. But although he was extremely angry in his heart, his face was still indifferent, and no one could see any clues. He nodded to Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling and said, "Don't worry. I'm here. Nothing will happen." After that, he stepped onto the field. Everyone saw that as soon as he appeared, he immediately suppressed Takahashi Shota's arrogance, especially Li Yundong's arrogant behavior, which made them whisper to each other and talk about it. "It's really invincible, Li. He doesn't take these Japanese people seriously at all. Alas, I hope he doesn't underestimate the enemy. In my opinion, he's bluffing." "Ah, what bluffing? Do you think anyone can be called invincible?" Be quiet, be quiet. Let's see how he deals with Takahashi Shota. In a while, we'll know whether he's really invincible or not." Everyone's eyes turned to Li Yundong, only to see this overly young man standing in the field. His feet were neither ding nor ba, and his expression was calm. There was no sign that he was about to fight fiercely at all. At this time, Takahashi Shota's momentum had reached its peak. The wound on his chest, which had been pierced, was quickly growing granulation, and the wound was stitched up. He raised his head, opened his eyes and shouted loudly. Suddenly, the ground under his feet sank and countless cracks appeared on the hard bluestone, spreading in all directions. Li Yundong looked at him indifferently and gently pinched his fingers in front of him. Everyone saw his 10 fingers flying, as if Buddha was pinching a flower or Sakyamuni was pinching a flower. He was calm and had no power at all. At this moment, everyone felt as if a real Buddha had appeared on the field. Although Li Yundong's momentum was far inferior to Takahashi Shota's, he had a great pressure from head to toe, as if he had become one with heaven and earth and returned to the same origin with all methods. As soon as an expert made a move, it would be obvious whether he was real or not. The cultivators of various sects had high and low cultivation quotients. Those with low cultivation quotients like Zhang Lufeng, Deng Yu, Deng Jiao, and others didn't dare to breathe and their eyes were fixed on him. Those with high cultivation quotients like Mao Yuchang, Su Yangzi, and others exclaimed in unison, "Unity of heaven and man, Buddhism and Taoism?" Although it was just a movement, although it was just a finger gesture, the cultivators of all sects in Japan were shocked by Li Yundong's realm of unity of heaven and man. They knew that although Takahashi Shoda was fierce, and at this time he was like a Vajra or an Arhat descending to the world, no matter how fierce and terrifying a monk was, in front of the supreme great way of the world, in front of the supreme sect of heaven and earth, how could he have any chance of winning? Asi Xingguang looked shocked. He murmured, "He has become stronger again. This posture. He has already comprehended the great way of truth. Izumo. This is a genius who is even more outstanding than you." Asi Chuyin didn't say a word. He stared at Li Yundong with fanatical and excited eyes. Sanji Tsunekatsu, who was standing to one side, suddenly shouted, "Takahashi, you have fought many battles in a row. Why don't you come down and rest for a while?" Takahashi Shoda didn't understand. How could he know what he was talking about? Sanji Tsunekatsu's words were said to Li Yundong. The subtext was, "Li Yundong, even if you win, you will only take advantage of the exhaustion of the opponent after a winning streak. It's no big deal." Li Yundong naturally understood his trick. He glanced at Sanji Tsunekatsu, and a sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said lightly, "Sanji Tsunekatsu, I didn't expect to meet you again. Don't worry, I won't take advantage of you. You tell him that I will stand here and let him cut me 3 times. I will never dodge." Sanji Tsunekatsu was both surprised and happy. He was surprised that Li Yundong dared to say such arrogant words and let Takahashi Shoda cut him 3 times. Sanji Tsunekatsu was happy that the knife in Takahashi Shoda's hand was the Amitabha righteous knife, which had been handed down for 500 years in the Imperial Shadow Hall. It was an extremely powerful Buddhist protective magic weapon. This knife had drunk blood for 500 years, and its murderous aura was extremely strong. Even on their side, no one dared to take a knife head-on, let alone 3. When the cultivators of the various sects in China heard this, they were all shocked and shouted, "Li Yundong, are you crazy? Why did you let him cut you 3 times? Why are you being polite to these little Japanese? Go on, kill him. Li Yundong, don't underestimate the enemy. Humph, Li Wudi is so arrogant. This knife is specialized in breaking the golden body. I want to see how he can take these 3 knives." Zhou Qin, Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, and the others were also ready to admonish him anxiously, but Ziyuan stopped them and said in a low voice, "Li Yundong has already comprehended the true methods of Buddhism and Taoism. Don't worry. Since he dares to boast, he will be fine." After listening to Sanji Tsunekatsu's translation, Takahashi Shoda couldn't help laughing wildly. He pointed the Zen knife in his hand at Li Yundong and shouted angrily, "You're courting death." His originally serious face suddenly became extremely ferocious, like a Vajra glaring and an Arhat going berserk. His eyes widened like copper bells and his eyes cracked. He stomped on the ground with both feet, and his body soared into the air like a cannonball in an instant. Everyone couldn't help looking up and saw that Takahashi Shoda's figure in the sky had turned into a very small black spot. Then the black spot fell from the sky and kept growing bigger. He was fierce, and the airflow around him was boiling with flames because of the friction. He was like an angry Vajra descending from the raging sea, and he cut toward Li Yundong with a knife from above. Chapter 702. Everyone saw that the power of this knife was overwhelming and unstoppable. It was as if even a mountain in front of them would be split by Takahashi Shoda's knife. Even a top master like Zhang Tongtian, the leader of the Qingqing sect, was horrified. Takahashi Shoda grinned hideously. He saw Li Yundong getting closer and closer in his sight. With this knife he would definitely split this arrogant guy into 2 pieces. Once he defeated this guy, he would become the most famous person in the Japanese cultivation world. As soon as this thought flashed through Takahashi Shoda's mind, the Zen knife in his hand slashed nearly 10 meters away from Li Yundong with a bang. It was as if it had hit an invisible hard object. A majestic force bounced back and sent Takahashi Shoda flying. Takahashi Shoda roared wildly. Half of his body was numb from the shock, and the hand holding the knife was torn. He looked at Li Yundong in shock and anger, only to see a giant Buddha about 10 meters high hovering in front of Li Yundong. This giant Buddha was faintly discernible, both of its hands forming the immovable fundamental seal. Although the 10-meter-tall giant Buddha was like a grain of sand in the ocean when compared to a majestic mountain like Mount Longhu, it was not tall at all. However, on this side peak of Mount Longhu, this giant Buddha exuded an awe-inspiring aura. It was as immovable as a mountain looking down on all other mountains. Takahashi Shoda looked at Li Yundong and the giant Buddha in front of him in shock. He knew that this giant Buddha was formed by Li Yundong's yang spirit, but he couldn't understand why Li Yundong's yang spirit was not broken after this knife attack. Takahashi Shoda subconsciously took a step back, but as soon as he did so, he immediately became alert. He gritted his teeth and the qi and blood in his body boiled to the extreme. With a loud shout, he rushed toward Li Yundong crazily again. Although he did not borrow the momentum of falling from the sky, the power of this strike was much stronger than before. The steel saber in his hand shone with a golden light, and the Buddha statue on the saber seemed to have come to life, glaring angrily at him. With a boom, the Amitabha righteous saber once again hit Li Yundong's yang spirit. But in an instant, Takahashi Shoda once again felt a majestic and powerful force coming back. It seemed that the greater his strength, the greater the force of the rebound. Takahashi Shoda's body seemed to be hit by an invisible giant hammer, and he flew back fiercely. As soon as he landed on the ground, the blue stone under his feet shattered. The gravel rolled up and the ground was plowed by him. But even so, his momentum did not stop, and he retreated like a cannonball. Takahashi Shoda roared. He stabbed the Zen blade in his hand into the ground and retreated more than 10 meters before he stopped. Takahashi Shoda was half kneeling on the ground, trembling all over. His hand that was holding the Zen knife was dripping with blood. The blood flowing from the crack between his thumb and index finger flowed along the handle of the knife and then flowed to the ground. Takahashi Shoda looked up at Li Yundong incredulously, only to see that the yang spirit in front of Li Yundong had not dissipated. Instead, it had grown a little stronger, as if his knife had added some strength to the other party. This is impossible. Takahashi Shoda fell to the ground and looked at Li Yundong in horror. He shouted, "Who the hell are you? This is impossible." The cultivators of all sects in China saw that Li Yundong had not made a move. Takahashi Shoda, who had been showing off his strength before, was already so shocked that his soul was almost broken. They immediately burst into thunderous cheers and applause. Wei Qing was so excited that her pretty face turned red, and her jade-like hands were almost broken. She shouted excitedly, "Super Li, you are really invincible. Good job." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were so excited that they almost jumped up and down, shouting non-stop. However, at this time, everyone outside the arena was focused on the arena, and their voices were drowned out by the clamor of the crowd, so no one paid attention to them. Not only them, but even an experienced and prudent cultivator like Su Yangzi also nodded slightly and said with admiration, "He is really powerful. He deserves his reputation." Mao Yuchang secretly admired him in her heart, but she was still unconvinced and said, "He is hypocritical. He could have killed the other party at once, but he chose to let the other party make 3 cuts. If the other party doesn't make the 3rd cut, what will he do?" As soon as she finished speaking, Takahashi Shoda suddenly let out a beast-like roar. He spat a mouthful of blood on the Zen blade in his hand. The Zen blade drank Takahashi Shoda's blood, and suddenly the Amitabha on the blade turned into a terrible bright red. A red light quickly rushed into Takahashi Shoda's body. The blood and hostility that the Amitabha righteous saber had accumulated over the past 500 years poured out at this moment. Everyone was shocked, and Su Yangzi even turned his head and looked at Mao Yuchang strangely. Although he didn't say anything, his eyes seemed to say, "Do you think Takahashi Shoda won't make the 3rd cut? You're wrong." Mao Yuchang blushed, straightened her neck, and said irrationally, "Do you think he can defeat the other party by letting the other party make 3 cuts? Su Yangzi didn't say anything and looked straight at the field. Everyone saw that Takahashi Shoda's body was shrouded by a strange red light. Takahashi Shoda's bones crackled like firecrackers. He suddenly stood up and walked toward Li Yundong step by step. With every step he took, a deep footprint was left in the ground. Although he was moving slowly, with every step he took, everyone could feel that his strength had increased by a fraction, and his stature had also grown by a fraction. At this time, Takahashi Shoda's muscles were bulging as if they were made of steel, and the blood vessels wrapped around his muscles were bulging like steel bars. His eyes bulged angrily as if they were about to fall out of their sockets. The strong murderous intent in his eyes would make anyone who looked at them feel scared. Takahashi Shoda walked up to Li Yundong with heavy steps. He held the Zen blade with both hands, raised it high, and let out a hysterical roar. "Go to hell." With a swish, the Zen blade tore through the air and space in an instant and slashed at Li Yunyang's yang spirit with a loud bang. With a loud crack, everyone felt as if countless thunderbolts had cut through the sky at the same time, and countless bells were ringing in unison. Although they were cultivators and their physical bodies were extremely strong, the sound still pierced their eardrums and almost tore them apart. Those with weaker cultivation immediately covered their ears and looked at the field with their teeth bared. Everyone saw smoke and rubble flying everywhere. Takahashi Shota and Li Yundong's figures were drowned in it. Li Yundong's tall and majestic Buddha statue and yang spirit also disappeared. Although the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation sects didn't like Takahashi Shota's arrogance, they couldn't help cheering loudly when they saw Takahashi Shota shatter Li Yunyang's yang spirit. Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others on the sidelines were so shocked that their faces turned pale. Their legs went soft and they almost fell to the ground. They thought that Li Yunyang's yang spirit must have been smashed by the opponent, so they couldn't see his huge yang spirit. Once the yang spirit was broken, it meant that Li Yunyang's body would definitely be destroyed. The cultivators of all sects in China also turned pale with horror. Many cultivators stamped their feet and said anxiously, "Alas, Li Yunyang shouldn't have been so conceited. Now it's all over. What should we do? Even Li Yunyang lost. It's over, it's really over this time." Mao Yuchang saw that although Li Yunyang was unfortunately right, she was not happy at all. She gritted her teeth and struggled to stand up. "This idiot, I told you not to show off. Now it's all over. Shirboy, let me go again. Our Chinese cultivation world can't be helplessly." Before she could finish her words, Su Yangzi suddenly reached out to stop her and said, "Don't worry, look." Mao Yuchang looked over and saw that after the smoke on the field gradually dissipated, the figures of Li Yunyang and Takahashi Shota slowly appeared. Li Yunyang was still standing in the same place. He stretched out a hand and pressed his fingers against the blade of the opponent's Zen blade, as if he had held the sharp Zen blade with one finger, making it impossible for him to take another step forward. As for Takahashi Shota, he was covered in blood. He stood there like a statue, motionless. The Amitabha righteous saber in his hand stopped in front of Li Yunyang. There was a faint smile at the corner of Li Yunyang's mouth, full of sarcasm for the opponent's overestimation of his own ability. Everyone was shocked, and the cheers of the Japanese cultivators stopped abruptly. They were all stunned like chickens and ducks that had been strangled by the throat. How is this possible? His yang spirit has obviously been smashed. Many cultivators on the sidelines were so shocked that they murmured to themselves, unable to understand the scene in front of them. At this time, there were also some sharp-eyed people who saw at a glance that Li Yunyang's fingertips were faintly shining, as if there was a very small Buddha standing on them. Those with high comprehension immediately realized that Li Yundong had shrunk his yang spirit to the tip of his finger in an instant and blocked the ferocious attack of the opponent. Originally, when the yang spirit was extremely huge, it could block the opponent's fierce knife. At this time, it was condensed on the tip of his finger. Although its power had been reduced, its strength had doubled. This was one of the true methods of Buddhism's 8 great freedom heavens. It could be big or small. Takahashi Shota stared at the Buddha, which was as small as a grain of sand on Li Yunyang's fingertips. His whole body trembled uncontrollably. The Amitabha Buddha's righteous saber in his hand, which could cut mountains and stones, was also trembling with him. Cracks slowly appeared on the body of the saber. Then, with a clang, the Amitabha righteous saber was instantly shattered into countless pieces. Takahashi Shota let out a miserable howl, and his body exploded with a bang, turning into a cloud of blood mist. Everyone's faces changed with horror. They knew that this was because Takahashi Shota's terrifying power had been bounced back by Li Yunyang, and as a result, his body had been shattered alive. For a moment, there was a dead silence on the scene, and everyone looked at Li Yunyang in horror. Mao Yuchang's mouth was so wide open that her fist could almost be stuffed in. This guy had let the opponent cut him 3 times, but he had actually killed the opponent. What kind of Taoist magic was this? What kind of power was this? This kind of power was simply unheard of and unseen. Even Ziyuan, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others who knew Li Yunyang the best, stared at him with their eyes wide open. They couldn't imagine how strong Li Yunyang had become after he woke up from meditation this time. Just as everyone was stunned, although Takahashi Shota's body had exploded into a cloud of blood mist in an instant, his yang spirit appeared in an instant. At this time he didn't have the ferocious murderous look on his face. Instead, he looked solemn and stood there with his palms together. He really had the posture of putting down the butcher's knife and becoming a Buddha immediately. Takahashi Shota recited the scriptures, moved his body, and was about to fly in the direction of Japan. However, Li Yunyang snorted coldly. "You've cut me 3 times and now you want to leave?" Seeing that Li Yunyang was unwilling to let go, the cultivators of the various sects in Japan couldn't help exclaiming loudly, "Li Yunyang, he has already become a Buddha. Let him go." Li Yunyang flew into a rage. Let him go? When he killed our Chinese cultivators here, did he ever let them go? After that, Li Yunyang shouted angrily, "Takahashi Shota, you've killed so many people and you want to become a Buddha? Obediently go to hell." Group 17 is full. Don't join it. Join Group 18, 7311385/***. Chapter 703. After Li Yundong shouted angrily, the faces of the cultivators of various sects in Japan all changed, especially when they saw Li Yundong slap toward Takahashi Shota's yang spirit. Suddenly 2 figures rushed out of the crowd and rushed toward Li Yundong. "Stop!" Li Yundong snorted coldly, and the yang spirit at the tip of his finger instantly turned into a 3-headed and 6-armed wisdom king. 4 of its arms pinched 2 Mahamudra and slapped toward the 2 people who were rushing over from the left and right. The other 2 arms still pinched a Mahamudra and firmly slapped Takahashi Shota's yang spirit. 9078. 8C346H5078678X0U30. 9C70 animate. With a miserable cry, Takahashi Shota's yang spirit was instantly torn apart and turned into countless avatars, frantically fleeing in all directions. This was the power of Jinshin. As long as it was not targeted by a specific powerful magical weapon, even if the yang spirit was smashed, it could still turn into countless avatars and flee in all directions. Unfortunately, Li Yundong happened to have such a powerful magical weapon in his hand, the Burning Thumb Pot, which was specially designed to deal with the countless avatars of the yang spirit escaping in all directions. Li Yundong quickly took out the Burning Thumb Pot and flicked his finger gently on the edge of the alms pot. With a ding, the Burning Thumb Pot immediately spread out a halo. The halo spread at an astonishing speed, and in an instant, it caught up with Takahashi Shota's avatars that were fleeing in all directions. Ever since Li Yundong had cultivated in the spirit space of the Burning Thumb Pot, he had the ability to be proficient in all Buddhist magical weapons. He was also the reincarnation of Wisdom King, and at this time he had advanced to the realm of immortal Jinshin, so the power of the Burning Thumb Pot had doubled in his hands. If Takahashi Shota's sun spirit hadn't been destroyed, the Burning Thumb Pot might not have been able to keep him. But at this time he was in a hurry to escape, so he turned the yang spirit into thousands of avatars and fled in all directions. As long as one avatar escaped, he would be able to escape. But he had never expected that this would allow the Burning Thumb Pot to exert its power to the extreme. As soon as Takahashi Shota's avatar was touched by the rippling halo, it immediately froze in place, like a flying insect caught in a spider's web. Takahashi Masashi struggled crazily, but the more he struggled, the more he felt that the binding force was a bit stronger. Then he flicked his finger again. With a crisp ding, the Burning Thumb Pot suddenly emitted a cyan halo, and it moved a little faster than before. Although the cultivators of the various sects had tempered their quintessential essence and inner cores to the point that they were as hard as steel, when the halo affected them, they still felt their chi and blood fluctuate. Their hearts trembled as though they were in the ocean, constantly being battered by ferocious waves. They couldn't help but be shocked. Their bodies were still intact and their yang spirits were still intact. What about Takahashi Shota, who had lost his body and countless yang spirits? Takahashi Shota's countless avatars were shocked by the second cyan light and immediately lost the strength to struggle. An invisible huge spider web firmly bound him between heaven and earth. At this time, Li Yundong stretched out his hand to flick for the 3rd time. At this time, the 2 people who had been blown away by Li Yundong's 2 Mahamudra couldn't help but exclaim in Chinese, "Li Yundong, you are so ruthless. Aren't you afraid of going to hell?" Li Yundong glanced at them and saw that they were both dressed like monks. One was wearing a red cassock with a bald head and a square face. He was holding a string of Buddha beads and wearing wooden clogs. The other was wearing a yellow cassock, a bamboo hat and a monk's staff. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing angrily. "Well said. Did you ever say such words when you were ruthless? You Japanese burned, killed and looted in China decades ago, but when you went back you became the gods worshipped in the Yasukuni shrine. Now you've killed all the Chinese cultivators on Mount Longhu. Isn't that the same as trying to kill all of us? You have done this kind of thing, but in the end you will become a Buddha, and I will go to hell for doing this kind of thing? What the F***ck is this? Li Yundong's scolding only made the cultivators of the various sects in Japan look gloomy, while the cultivators of the various sects in China were proud and cheered loudly. Li Yunyang flicked the burning thumb pot for the third time. With a ding sound, the third halo spread out in all directions. Takahashi Shota's yang spirit doppelganger was instantly pulled back by the halo, and all of them were collected into the burning thumb pot. Everyone saw that after Takahashi Shota's yang spirit doppelganger was pulled into the burning thumb pot, his yang spirit was like a small person trapped in the burning thumb pot. He struggled desperately to escape, but there seemed to be an invisible cage around the burning thumb pot, causing him to run into walls everywhere. When the two Japanese monks saw this scene, they couldn't help but feel anxious. They shouted, "Li Yundong, let him go. We can discuss everything else." Although Takahashi Shota was violent and arrogant, his cultivation was recognized as the top in the Japanese cultivation world. Although there were many Imperial Shadow Hall monk soldiers, there were not many perfect killing machines like Takahashi Shota. In order to cultivate him, the Pure Land True sect had spent a lot of money and material resources. Moreover, his status in the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land True sect was quite high. If he were to die in China, it would be a big blow to the Pure Land True sect in the Imperial Shadow Hall. Li Yundong sneered and held the burning thumb pot high in his hand so that everyone could see it clearly. He said loudly, "Since you have done this, don't blame us for doing it again. Takahashi Shota killed 2 of us. I'm already letting him off easy by letting him use 1 life to pay for 2 of ours. If you are not afraid of death, just come up. I'll send you to accompany him." After that, he activated his Jinchi, and a blue flame suddenly appeared in the burning thumb pot. As soon as Takahashi Shota's yang spirit was burned by the blue flame, he immediately let out an incomparably tragic wail. His countless yang spirit doppelgangers gathered together in an instant and madly hit the wall of the burning thumb pot. However, as soon as he hit it, the yang spirit was scattered and many doppelgangers were burned. Takahashi Shota let out a miserable howl and immediately gathered together again, madly hitting it again. However, when the number of his yang spirit doppelgangers was intact, it was useless. At this time it was like hitting a stone with an egg. Everyone saw Takahashi Shota struggle for a while in the blue flame like a trapped beast. Slowly the yang spirit was burned less and less, and gradually it disappeared. It turned into a wisp of blue smoke, slowly drifting up from the top of the burning thumb pot, and finally dissipating in the air without a trace. For a moment all the cultivators, whether from China or Japan, were silent. For cultivators, there was nothing more terrifying than the scene in front of them. Not only had the yang spirit been destroyed, but it had also been so cruelly refined and burned to death. It was really creepy. Although the cultivators of all sects in China hated Takahashi Shota to the core, they were still shocked and speechless when they saw this scene. However, after watching Takahashi Shota being refined, the red-robed monk and the yellow-robed monk sat down together. One put his palms together and the other played with the Buddha beads. They began to recite the Sutra of Reincarnation. Zhang Lufang watched for a while and whispered, "Why are you still reciting? His soul is gone. Can you send him to the afterlife?" All the cultivation sects in the world believed that people had souls after death, but they would go to different places. However, Takahashi Shota's yang spirit had been destroyed, which meant that his soul no longer existed in the world. The Sutra of Reincarnation was probably playing the lute to a cow and throwing flirtatious glances at the blind. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao said in unison, "He deserves it. If such a person is allowed to be reincarnated, it would be unreasonable." Zhang Ling and the others also felt that it was the right thing to do, but because of their status they could only think about it and not say it out loud. The 2 monks were reciting the scriptures on the field. Some of the frivolous and impetuous cultivators of all sects in China laughed and said, "Hey, is this Sutra of Reincarnation for you to hear? That's not right. Shouldn't your Pure Land sect be reciting the Sutra of Immeasurable Life? Why are you reciting it?" "Humph, I write a treatise and say a verse. I wish to see Amitabha Buddha and all living beings in the world. I wish to be reborn in a peaceful and happy country. The scriptures are nice to hear, but it's a pity that you're reciting scriptures in wolf skin. I don't know if Buddha will accept you or not." When the cultivators of all sects in Japan heard these harsh voices, they began to scold them one after another. For a time after the fight, they began to scold each other again. The scolding went straight to the sky and it was very lively. The 2 monks in red and yellow robes turned a deaf ear to this voice. After they finished reciting the scriptures, they stood up together and glared at Li Yundong. The red-robed monk shouted sternly, "Li Yundong, this matter is definitely not over. Our Pure Land sect will remember this humiliation. After that, he shouted at the Japanese cultivators, "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, 40 to 50 monks came out of the crowd and followed him down the mountain. At this time, there were only more than 200 people in the Japanese cultivation group. At this time, 40 to 50 people had left. Suddenly, the number of people was greatly reduced, and their momentum was greatly weakened. Saionji Tsunekatsu's face changed. He quickly stopped in front of them and began to speak Japanese with them. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at them in confusion, as if they didn't understand why there were so many people in a sect. Deng Yu asked Zhang Lufang, "Is this Pure Land sect very powerful? Why do they have so many people?" Although Zhang Lufang was an inner disciple, she didn't know much about the cultivation sect of the neighbor in the east. She shook her head, but at this time, an old and hoarse voice came from the side. The Pure Land sect is an extremely powerful and huge sect in the Japanese cultivation world, especially the Pure Land sect. There are a total of 22 sects, among which there are 10 famous and powerful sections. When they heard this voice, they turned their heads and saw that Zhang Kongyun had already woken up and was talking with a pale face. Zhang Lufang was overjoyed. "Master, are you awake?" Zhang Ling, who was beside her, was also happy and asked with concern, "Shirdi, are you okay?" Zhang Kongyun forced a smile and said, "I'm fine. I won't die. It's just that I've lost all my face." Zhang Ling smiled and said, "It's good that you're fine. You can rest assured and recover." Zhang Lufang saw that Zhang Kongyun was depressed. It was obvious that he was still brooding over the defeat in the fight just now. She rolled her eyes and wanted to distract him, so she asked, "Master, you just said that there are 10 famous and powerful sects in the Pure Land sect. Which 10 are they?" Zhang Kongyun was indeed attracted by her topic. He coughed and said, "The most powerful one is the Pure Land sect's Hope Temple sect, also known as the West Hope Temple sect or the East sect. It has a total of 10,500 temples and more than 20 million believers. Takahashi Shota just now is a soldier monk of the Imperial Shadow Hall of the East sect. The second is the True Sect's Otani sect, also known as the East Hope Temple sect. It has more than 8,900 temples and more than 10 million believers. Although the other 8 sects are not as powerful as these 2 sects, they can't be underestimated. They are the True Sect's Takata sect, the True Sect's Foguang Temple sect, the True Sect's Xingjing sect, the True Sect's Mubian sect, the True Sect's Chiyunlu sect, the True Sect's Qingzhou Temple sect, the True Sect's Three Disciples sects, and the True Sect's Shanyuan sect." Zhang Lufang was tongue-tied. So many sects? So many temples? Why are there so many believers? Although the Jingyi school was known as the #1 cultivation sect in China, it was nothing compared to the Pure Land sect. Zhang Kongyun took a breath and continued, "All the people in Japan are religious. You can't compare them." Zhang Lufang asked in confusion, "But shouldn't the Shintoism be the most powerful sect in Japan? Why does the Pure Land sect account for so many people?" Zhang Kongyun's face was a little pale. He smiled and said, "Hey, this is the tradition of the Pure Land sect. No matter what they do, they are the vanguard. The elites of more than a dozen sects have all come out. Hundreds of years ago, during the Warring States period of Japan, the monk soldiers of the Pure Land sect beat the famous people of all countries until they cried for their parents. Decades ago, the Japanese military government invaded China, and the monk soldiers of more than a dozen sects of the Pure Land sect rushed to China to burn, kill, and loot. Decades later, they once again became the vanguard. Alas, it's a pity that I was shaken at that time and didn't give these guys a show of strength." Zhang Lufang comforted him and said, "Master, it's okay. Li Yundong has already avenged you." Zhang Kongyun looked at Li Yundong with a complicated expression and sighed softly. "I'm old." Zhang Lufang giggled and said, "Master, you are old but vigorous." Zhang Kongyun shook his head with a wry smile. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a cry of surprise coming from afar. "What happened here? What the hell is going on?" Hearing this, everyone turned their heads and saw Lu Chunping running along the mountain road from afar. Before she arrived, her voice had already come from afar. Chapter 704. Everyone present saw Lu Chunping return with the officials and translators behind him. They immediately looked at each other in dismay and were greatly shocked. 9078. 8C34I6850782678X0U30. 9C70 before Lu Chunping could arrive, Zhou Ping quickly rushed to Zhang Ling. Zhang Ling asked with a sullen face, "What's wrong with you? Why did they come back?" Why didn't you take them to other places to wander around? Zhou Ping said with a sad face, Master, it's not that I don't want to. It's just that you made too much noise here. Lu Chunping insisted on coming back and I couldn't stop him. Zhang Ling's heart sank. She knew that today's matter would not end well, so she immediately stepped forward and was about to speak. Unexpectedly, when Lu Chunping saw the scene, he was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. At this time the scene was a mess. The originally flat bluestone ground was full of potholes, as if it had just been hit by a fierce bombardment. The most terrible thing was that the ground was covered in blood. The Taoist hall seemed to have become a slaughterhouse. Lu Chunping stared blankly for a while. When he saw Zhang Ling walking toward him, he suddenly flew into a rage. He jumped 3 feet high and roared hysterically, "You be asterisk stards, do you take my words as nothing? Didn't I say that we should coexist peacefully and communicate in a friendly manner? Are you guys fighting a world war?" Zhang Ling saw him spitting saliva everywhere and scolding indiscriminately. She was a little angry, but she suppressed her anger and said, "Donor Lu, this matter is not caused by us," but, before she could finish speaking, Lu Chunping pointed at Zhang Ling and scolded her, "Don't you know how to control them? Don't you know how to restrain yourself? If they pick on you, will you help them? Didn't I tell you to be patient before? You're treating my words like wind passing by your ears." Zhang Ling's status in the Jingyi school was extremely high, and she was treated politely wherever she went. She had never encountered such a thing before. She suddenly flew into a rage and her eyebrows rose higher and higher. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, felt that something was wrong. She rushed over to Li Yunyang and asked in a low voice, "Master, should we do something?" Li Yundong glanced at her and said, "In front of the enemy, let's unite against the enemy. It's not good for us to step in, so it's best if you step in. Go and help. After all, you're all cultivators of China." After getting Li Yundong's opinion, Zhou Qin felt reassured. She took a step forward and sneered, "How powerful! How powerful!" Lu Chunping was so angry that she immediately turned her head and said angrily, Who's farting?" Zhou Qin frowned and shouted rudely, You're talking nonsense." Lu Chunping was so angry that he was screaming. Just as he was about to curse, he saw Zhou Qin at a glance. He was stunned and couldn't help being shocked by Zhou Qin's beauty and temperament. For a moment he couldn't say anything. After a while he came to his senses and shouted angrily, "Who are you? How dare you talk to me like that? Which sect are you from?" From Lu Chunping's point of view, as long as they were from a cultivation sect, he could interfere. After all, no matter how powerful these cultivators were, they couldn't kill officials and rebel, right? However, he had never expected that the stunning beauty in front of him was the one he couldn't control. Zhou Qin smiled coldly, like a winter plum in the snow, and said proudly, "I am Super Li's eldest disciple, Zhou Qin. Do you know me now?" Lu Chunping didn't react for a moment and scolded, "Super Li? Bah! I've never heard of you, Zhou Qin. I'm even..." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly thought of something. Wait, Zhou Qin? Could it be Zhou Kachang's daughter? No. No way. It can't be so coincidental, can it? Lu Chunping took a closer look at Zhou Qin. Sure enough, the more he looked at her, the more she looked like her. His mouth was wide open and he couldn't say anything else for a while. But what he had said was like spilled water. He had just scolded someone before and now he suddenly turned around. He really couldn't stop himself. Lu Chunping's old face turned red and he couldn't say anything for a while. But at this time, Sanji Tsunakatsu said, "Lu Jun, we came here with the intention of equal communication and peaceful learning, but we didn't expect that you Chinese cultivators had such a deep prejudice against us, which led to such a tragedy. I think it's necessary for you to give us an explanation for this matter, Lu Jun, otherwise, we will deeply regret it." These diplomatic words were like needles hidden in silk floss, causing Lu Chunping's back to be covered with a layer of cold sweat. However, at this time the people of Pure Land True Sect who were about to leave also surrounded them. A red-robed monk glared at Lu Chunping and shouted loudly. Lu Chunping naturally couldn't understand Japanese, so he had to turn his head to look at the translator. The female translator closest to him had a very ugly expression on her face. She said timidly, "He said. They killed an eminent monk. Was me. A man named Li Yundong, one of our Chinese people, just killed him. He wants us to hand over the murderer, otherwise. What? Someone died? Oh my God." When Lu Chunping heard this, he almost fainted. But when he heard the last sentence, the translator didn't finish. He held back his anger and asked, Otherwise what? The female translator said hesitantly, otherwise, they will find me and settle accounts with us. Lu Chunping was so angry that he almost wanted to go crazy. Settle accounts? You want to settle accounts with me? Who do I want to settle accounts with? Damn it, someone was killed. Lu Chunping's face suddenly became extremely ugly. He couldn't care less about Zhou Qin's identity. He turned his head and roared at Li Yundong, "Are you crazy? How dare you kill a Japanese friend?" Li Yundong sneered and said, "A Japanese friend? Do you call the Japanese who killed 2 Chinese cultivators a Japanese friend?" Lu Chunping's face suddenly turned red. He turned his head again and looked at Zhang Ling, panting heavily. What the hell is going on? Zhang Ling didn't want to talk to Lu Chunping. She was afraid that she would scold him the moment she opened her mouth. Zhang Ling gave Zhang Lufang a look, and Zhang Lufang immediately understood. She quickly told Zhang Ling what had happened. Zhang Lufang was beautiful and had a pleasant voice. She told the whole story clearly in a few words. When Lu Chunping heard this, he suddenly felt a headache coming on and wished that he had never come back. But if he hadn't come back, he was afraid that he would not have been able to escape a fault of dereliction of duty. After thinking about it, Lu Chunping almost gritted his teeth with hatred. All his anger was poured out on everyone present. The situation in front of him was really like a wolf in the front and a tiger behind. No matter which side Lu Chunping sided with, it would be wrong. If he sided with the Chinese at that time, the Japanese would make a noise and complain to the higher-ups. Maybe he would even lose his position as an official in the Yamen. But if he sided with the Japanese, Zhou Qin was not to be trifled with. The power of the Zhou family was a small matter, but at this critical moment he would definitely be scolded as a traitor in the end. Who could bear this? When Lu Chunping's head was full of sweat, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He jumped up and shouted, "Stop arguing. If something happened, just disperse. We'll wait for the police to deal with this matter. Right, we don't have any blood feud. As the saying goes, it's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. Don't be impatient. When the police come later, they will definitely give you justice." In Lu Chunping's opinion, his Taiji fist was not bad. He had pushed all the blame onto the public security system. Anyway, he couldn't take care of this mess. Whoever could take care of it would. But when everyone heard this, there was an uproar. There was no blood feud? After these few fights, even if there was no hatred, he was afraid that there would be hatred. The Japanese were waiting for revenge, and the Chinese were not willing to disperse like this. Lu Chunping's words had offended both sides at the same time. The Japanese were the first to not buy it. When the cultivators of the Pure Land sect heard this, they were all furious and immediately left. Even Sayonji Tsunekatsu and the others could not stop them. The cultivators of all sects in China also began to make noise, pointing at Lu Chunping and shouting abuse. Lu Chunping was sweating profusely in the field, and the officials next to him also had ashen faces. Several of them even took out their mobile phones and looked at Lu Chunping eagerly. As long as he said a word, they would call the police. At this moment, a middle-aged man wearing a high black hat and a wide-sleeved white robe whispered a few words to Sayonji Tsunekatsu and walked slowly to the field. The Japanese seemed to be unaware of Lu Chunping's existence. He cupped his hands on the field, cleared his throat, and spoke in Japanese. Although everyone hated this group of Japanese devils at this time, they saw that this middle-aged man had a dignified appearance and an excellent bearing. His every movement revealed an indescribable elegance and grandeur. Especially when he opened his mouth to speak, his voice seemed to be singing a poem. Although they didn't know what he was saying, the sonorous and powerful tone of his voice, and the cadence was also quite beautiful. At this time, Sayonji Tsunekatsu translated for the middle-aged man in a loud voice, "Enyang Master Abe of the Japanese Enyang sect is reasonable." At this time, the field suddenly quieted down. For a moment, the cultivators of all sects in China widened their eyes and looked at Abe carefully. Chinese cultivators didn't know much about the Shinto of the Earth Imperial sect in Japan, but the Enyang master of the Abe family was well known to everyone. Abe Enyang was not a famous figure in Japan, but his ancestors, the great Enyang master Abe Saimai and Abe Yasukin, who had personally sealed the mystical silver fox, were definitely well known to everyone, including women and children. Abe no Saimai and Abe no Yasuhisa. Even in the eyes of the top experts in the Chinese cultivation world, these two were names that reverberated like thunder. That was because this family once represented the pinnacle of the Japanese cultivation world. Li Yunyang looked at Abe Enyang seriously. He nodded slightly and said, "Well, how do you want to compete?" But before Sayonji Tsunekatsu could translate, Lu Chunping suddenly said loudly, Do you all think I don't exist? Do you all think my words are bullshit? What did I just say? After Abe Inyang listened to Sanjit Tsunekatsu's translation, he glanced at Lu Chunping faintly, said a few words in Japanese, and then took out a 5-pointed star talisman from his sleeve and held it between his 2 fingertips. Sanjit Tsunekatsu translated for him. Jinrenli, Lord Abe said that as long as you can break his magic you will win. Li Yunyang was stunned and secretly vigilant. Jinqi surged all over his body. Although he didn't know what magic Abe Inyang was going to use, he planned to deal with all changes by remaining unchanged. He could be strong, but the bright moon shines on the river. Everyone saw that the 5-pointed star talisman gradually became brighter and brighter. This light was very dazzling even in the daytime. After Abe Inyang quickly recited a spell, the 5-pointed star talisman in his hand suddenly ignited and turned into a blue light and disappeared. The people on the sidelines suddenly looked nervously at every corner of the field, as if a monster could appear anywhere. But just when everyone was suspicious, Lu Chunping suddenly danced and laughed strangely. He even sang a Japanese song, and his movements were the dance movements of a Japanese geisha. The cultivators of all sects in China were dumbfounded for a moment. They were amused and horrified at the same time. Those who reacted quickly immediately realized what was going on and stared at Abe with their eyes wide open. No way, this guy actually cast an illusion on Lu Chunping? Li Yunyang also quickly understood. It turned out that this guy was using Lu Chunping as a sex experiment so that he could break his illusion. This is too messy, isn't it? The officials who followed Lu Chunping to the sidelines were also shocked and pale at this time. Some people dared to reach out and pull Lu Chunping, trying to wake him up. But as soon as they pulled, Lu Chunping's face suddenly became extremely ferocious and horrible. He stared at them and scolded them in very fluent Japanese. This scared them so much that they looked at each other for a moment. Lu Chunping doesn't understand Japanese. How did he suddenly become like this? They watched Lu Chunping scream and dance as if he was possessed by a ghost, as if he had gone mad. The young female translator who had translated for Lu Chunping before was so scared that her teeth were chattering. She whispered, "Will we become like this later?" These words caused the few of them to fall silent at the same time. Immediately after, someone let out a yell and dashed down the mountain. With the first one there was immediately a second one. No matter how wrong they felt at this time, they could only shout with tears streaming down their faces, "Secretary General Lu, it's not that our army is incompetent, but that these bastards are too cunning. Please hold on. We, all our compatriots in Guishi County of Ingtan City, support you in spirit." For a moment, the group of officials and a few translators covered their heads and ran down the mountain. Group 18 is full. Don't add any more, Group 19 will open in 2 days. Chapter 705. Li Yundong looked at Lu Chunping, who was dancing in front of him, and couldn't help frowning. Soon after the battle in Mount Koya, the Japanese cultivators had already discovered his identity and background as the reincarnation of Wisdom King. The battle just now had confirmed this point, making these Japanese fully understand. Don't use Buddhist magic and powerful magical weapons to attack me, otherwise you will be asking for trouble. It was precisely because they realized this in an instant that Pure Land True Sect immediately chose to retreat collectively, so as to use their indignation to save the face of the sect. Although Takahashi Shoda was a famous expert in the cultivation world of Japan, he was not the strongest in front of such a huge cultivation sect as Pure Land True Sect. The suzerain of Pure Land True Sect had not made a move yet, nor had their great monk Zheng appeared. As long as the strongest person did not appear, they would not fall too badly. They would not be completely defeated, and they would have an explanation when they went back. Although dozens of people from more than a dozen sects of the Pure Land True Sect had evacuated collectively, there were still many Japanese masters on the field. Not to mention anything else, the great Onmyoji of the ape family was an extremely difficult opponent to deal with. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were on the sidelines, looked around curiously. They looked at Li Yundong and Abe, who were motionless, and then at Lu Chunping, who seemed to be possessed by a ghost. Deng Jiao, who was shy, couldn't help asking curiously, "Shiji Lu Feng, why isn't Li Yundong moving?" After the officials left, the cultivators of all sects on the field also calmed down. Their attention was once again attracted to the scene. Zhang Lufang looked at Lu Chunping nervously and said in a low voice, "Li Yundong is speculating what kind of illusion the other party is using and how to break it." Deng Yu smiled maliciously. "Won't it be solved if we kill this guy?" Zhang Lufang turned her head and glared at her. "How can we cultivators kill unarmed ordinary people? Deng Yu was scolded by her. She pouted and said, "Who told this guy to be so annoying?" Zhang Lufang said in a low voice, "No matter how annoying you are, you can't attack ordinary people. You must remember this. This is the iron law of our cultivators. Otherwise you will suffer divine punishment." Deng Yu made an odd sound and said resentfully, "Then? Senior Sister Lufang, how do we break this illusion? Isn't Li Yundong very powerful? Why hasn't there been any movement?" Zhang Lufang knew that they had only been cultivating for a short time and didn't know much about fighting, so she patiently explained, "There are many kinds of illusions. There are many kinds of illusions in the cultivation world of Hualong. Those who are most proficient in illusions are the fox spirits of the Fox Zen school, followed by the cultivators of Lu Guandao. In Japan, the Onmyoji were probably the most proficient in Genjutsu. Yin-yang masters have many types of illusions such as illusion technique, illusion technique, illusion technique, illusion spirit technique, illusion technique, and so on. There are more than 10 types of illusions, and every type of illusion has a different method of breaking it. If you fail to break it, then the person using the illusion will probably have to stay like this forever. Deng Yu was taken aback. "Then what about this Lu something guy?" Zhang Lufang said helplessly, "Then he can only accept his fate. However, it's a small matter that he has become a lunatic, but if this matter is spread out and the people above know about it, I'm afraid we will also be out of luck. This Japanese is up to no good." Deng Yu looked at Li Yundong eagerly, her hands clenched into fists, like a young girl praying. "God bless Li Yundong, let him pass this test smoothly." Li Yundong really wanted to pass the test smoothly now, but the illusion in front of him was really difficult for him to deal with. There are many types of Onmyoji in Japan, such as the ape family, and the ape family's mortal enemy, the Kumo family, and other sections. They all belong to the Japanese Shintoism, and the Yin-yang sect originated from the Warring States period of China. During the Warring States period, Zhou Yin and Zhou Shuang of the Qi Kingdom proposed the Yin-yang theory, which regarded yin and yang as two forces inside the body of all things. They believed that yin and yang were the source of all things in the world. This concept coincided with the idea of the founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu: Tao begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets all things. Therefore, Onmyoji had a strong Taoist imprint from the beginning. Taoism explained all things through the 5 elements of yin and yang, and Onmyoji happened to be the same. Therefore, the origin of all the magic of Onmyoji was actually similar to the magic of Taoism. The magic of Taoism was nothing more than the 5 elements, yin and yang, and the power of thunder. To generate a magic, it was natural to use the yin and yang qi and the 5 elements of qi in the body to drive the jinqi, so as to use the 5 elements of heaven and earth to release the magic. In the same way, it was the same to crack the illusion. The source of the magic power of the illusion in front of him must be created through yin and yang and 5 elements. If he wanted to crack the illusion, he must understand the source of the opponent's magic power and the composition of the magic. Otherwise, if he cracked it rashly and failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although Li Yundong didn't like Lu Chunping, who was biased, he was even more unwilling to lose the battle in front of him. Li Yundong carefully looked at Lu Chunping in front of him. He was keenly aware that the facial features on Lu Chunping's face were significantly different from before. Before, Lu Chunping's nose was black and dry, the corners of his eyes were blue, and his lips were bright red like fire. At this time, the tip of his nose was shiny, and there was a faint brownish-blue qi coming out of his nose. There were even red spots in his eyes. Li Yundong knew that the Yellow Emperor's canon of internal medicine said, "The nose is the organ of the lungs, the eyes are the organ of the liver, the mouth and lips are the organ of the spleen, the tongue is the organ of the heart, and the ears are the organ of the kidney." Before, Lu Chunping could see that there was a big problem with his 5 internal organs from the look, listen, ask, and feel. The nose was black and dry, which was the result of excessive indulgence in sexual intercourse. Such a person's kidneys must be weak in premature ejaculation. The people with blue eyes mostly had liver problems, and the lips were bright red like fire, which meant that this person had heat poison in his body, and the yin deficiency and fire were strong. But at this time Lu Chunping was abnormal. His face was red, the tip of his nose was black and dry, the corners of his eyes were blue, and his lips were bright red. This meant that the qi of the liver and kidney in Lu Chunping's body must be strong at this time. At this time, there was a brownish-blue qi coming out of his nose, and there were red spots in his eyes. This meant that there was something wrong with Lu Chunping's spleen, and his blood flow was not smooth. Li Yundong observed for a while. He had basically determined where the other party's illusion magic came from. From the observation of the 5 senses, he could judge the condition of the 5 internal organs, and from the condition of the 5 internal organs, he could infer the source of the mystery of the 5 elements magic. The heart, liver, spleen, lung and kidney corresponded to the 5 elements of fire, wood, earth, metal and water. At this time, Lu Chuanping's liver and kidney were strong, which meant that the illusion Lu Chunping was suffering from must have been produced by the qi of wood and water. It was precisely because this magic was applied to Lu Chuanping's body that his liver and kidney suddenly became strong for a while. As long as he took the right medicine, the other party's illusion would immediately be resolved. But at this time, Li Yundong was also keenly aware. He knew that since the other party was an outstanding yin-yang master, especially as the patriarch of the ape family, he would definitely not use such a simple illusion to fight with him. Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but think of the time when he had just started to cultivate. Ziyuan had taken out her 9th heaven Ziyuan silk to show him and taught him about the dark fighting skills of magic weapon fighting for the first time. Ziyuan's 9th heaven Ziyuan silk had 3 different Jinchi auras of yin, yang, and wood. At that time, Ziyuan had relied on yin qi to entangle with him in the open, luring the enemy step by step. When he had been led to the hinterland, suddenly the yang qin and wood qi of her magic weapon had rushed out at the same time, and he had been defeated. This matter had left a deep impression on Li Yunyang. It made him realize that fighting with methods is like using troops, and that fighting with magic was also the false is the real, and the real is the false. Could the result on Lu Chuanping's face be true? Could it be a trap of the other party? The other party was a famous great yin-yang master. She wouldn't use such a simple illusion, would she? At this time, Li Yundong squinted at Lu Chunping, and his eyes fell on Lu Chuanping's tongue. At this time, Lu Chunping was not only dancing, but also baring her teeth and claws. Li Yundong's sharp eyes saw at a glance that the tip of Lu Chuanping's tongue was extremely thick, like a thick layer of cold white calluses. Li Yundong's heart suddenly moved. Of the 5 senses, the tongue corresponded to the heart of the 5 internal organs, and the heart corresponded to the 5 elements of fire. This meant that there must be something wrong with Lu Chuanping's heart at this time, and there must be a cold yin qi lingering around it. At this time, Li Yundong's heart was calm. He concluded that the other party's magic must be a combination of yin qi, wood qi, and water qi. As long as he used yang qi, metal qi, and fire qi to attack Lu Chuanyuan's lungs and heart at the same time, he would definitely be able to break this illusion immediately. As soon as this thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind, he immediately pinched his fingers and bent them slightly. He quickly flicked Lu Chuanping's body 3 times in the air, one on the Shinfeng acupoint near his lungs, the other on the Tianqi acupoint near his heart, and the other on the Shinting acupoint on his forehead. The reason why the illusion could work on people was that the caster disturbed the normal qi of the 5 elements of the human body, thus causing the other party's 5 internal organs to be in disorder and qi and blood to be in disorder. This further caused the qi of the upper dantian in the brain to be in a mess, and he couldn't think like a normal person. Li Yundong's 3rd flick had stabilized the chaotic qi in Lu Chuanping's brain. Lu Chunping, who had been dancing, suddenly seemed to have been immobilized. He stood there in a daze, motionless. In the eyes of the cultivators on the sidelines, Li Yundong was stunned for a long time. After he finally moved, he raised his hand and flicked his fingers 3 times, and Lu Chunping immediately quieted down. Some people with low cultivation quotients couldn't see the slightest mystery, while some cultivators with high cultivation quotients and high knowledge were full of praise. Su Yangzi nodded secretly on the side of the field and said, "If Li Yundong won purely by strength, then it wouldn't be considered a skill." But in the blink of an eye, he was able to see through the mystery of his opponent's illusion and immediately counterattack. This is really outstanding and commendable. Mao Yuchang also secretly admired Li Yundong's reaction, but she still said unforgiving, "How can it be so easy? If I were Abe, would I put all the flaws in front of you for you to see clearly?" As soon as she finished speaking, Lu Chunping suddenly roared. His whole body trembled violently, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead, and 2 sharp horn-like hard objects slowly protruded from his forehead. His face turned blue and black, and his facial features became extremely ferocious, as if he was about to become a yaksha demon. The cultivators on the sidelines were all shocked. Li Yundong was also shocked, and his face was awe-inspiring. He thought to himself, "What's going on? Did I fail to crack the illusion? No way. That's impossible. While Li Yundong was in shock, Abe, who was opposite him, suddenly smiled and said a few words in a loud voice. Sanjitsu Nakatsu, who was on the sidelines, translated with some schadenfreude, "Generally, if you think that our Abe family only has a few moves, then you are very wrong. Now, let me show you what a real great Yin-Yang master is." Chapter 706. Abe Yuji chose to fight with Li Yundong in illusions. He had witnessed Li Yundong defeat his opponents with terrifying power twice, so he knew that although his cultivation was not low, if he fought with Li Yundong head-on, it was very likely that he would be defeated. 9078. 8C3 866788X0U30. 9C7 Moreover, as a Yin-Yang master, he was naturally good at summoning ghosts, but the other party was the reincarnation of Akalanatha. Wherever he stood, with his hands pinching the Akalanatha seal, the power emitted from his body was enough to deter any demons and ghosts. Not to mention controlling these ghosts to summon up the courage to attack Li Yundong. Even if he could barely control these ghosts to attack Li Yundong, he was afraid that they would be restrained by the power of Akalanatha. Knowing that it was impossible to do it, it was obviously not wise. Abe Yuji cleverly released two illusions on Lu Chunping. One was the Phantom Soul technique to control the other party's mind, and the other was the Phantom Soul technique to control the other party's body. Although illusions occupied the word phantom, as the name implied, these were all illusory illusions, but when the illusions were cultivated to the peak, they could also be made real. The Phantom Soul technique and the Phantom Soul technique used by Abe Yuji before could be said to be two opposite spells of the Yin and Yang 5 elements. If Li Yundong made a move against the Phantom Soul technique, the power of Jinchi would definitely enhance the power of the Phantom Soul technique. Similarly, if Li Yundong made a move against the Phantom Soul technique, it would enhance the power of the Phantom Soul technique. It could be said that the two illusions restrained and supported each other, complemented each other, and were a perfect combination of spells that could hardly be broken. In Abe Yuji's view, he wanted to fight with Li Yundong, not with strength, wisdom, not with courage. At present, he was obviously in an invincible position. Li Yundong didn't know it. Although he broke the Phantom Soul technique, his strength was like a new force, and immediately stimulated the Phantom Soul technique. Originally, the Phantom Soul technique could only make the person who was cast mistakenly think that he had become something, but how powerful was Li Yundong's Jinchi? As soon as his majestic chi entered Lu Chuanyuan's body, the delusion spelt in his body suddenly became real, like rain after a long drought. His bones and body began to change shape. Li Yundong cracked one magic, but immediately activated another. The faces of the cultivators present turned pale for a moment. They knew that the illusion had become real, which meant that the magic was irreversible. Li Yundong had lost the battle, which meant that there were almost no powerful masters in the Chinese cultivation world who could stop these Japanese. This battle would end in a crushing defeat for the Chinese cultivation world. Worst of all, a living official had been turned into a monster. How was he going to explain this to the higher-ups? For a moment, the faces of Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin were as pale as paper. Zhou Qin stammered, This is impossible. Master will never lose." Su Chan grabbed Zi Yuan's arm anxiously and kept shaking it. "Sister Zi Yuan, what should we do? Was there any other way? Hurry up and think of a way." Zi Yuan bit her lips so hard that it almost bled. Her brows had never been so furrowed before, and her expression had never been as anxious as it was today. She couldn't help but send a voice transmission to Li Yundong. "Li Yundong, winning or losing is a small matter. You can't let this guy become a monster. Otherwise, if this matter gets out, it will be a big disaster." Although Li Yundong was shocked and provoked by his opponent's words, he had fought countless battles since he had taken Renyuan Jindan, and his mind had long been extremely firm. The greater the pressure, the calmer he was. The more critical the situation was, the more he could turn the tide. At this time, when he heard Zi Yuan's words, his heart suddenly moved. He opened his eyes, raised his hand, and pulled out a few strands of hair from his head. With a shake of his wrist, like throwing gold needles, he pricked the hair in his hand into the arteries of Lu Chuanping's neck, chest, elbows, and thighs. Lu Chuanping's body shook. These strands of hair were firmly stuck to his body like steel wires, and there was no sign of softening at all. The people on the sidelines saw this and were secretly shocked. Almost everyone on the field could throw their hair like needles, but Li Yundong, after throwing it out and pricking the opponent's body, could still be as hard as a steel needle, not softening at all. That was really a shocking ability. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, the two rookies, were tongue-tied and asked, is Li Yundong's hair made of steel wires? However, Zhang Lufang explained with a face full of awe, no, this is caused by Li Yundong's extremely strong and fierce jinqi in it. Such a strong jinqi attached to a strand of hair, if thrown out, can even pierce through a stone, but it didn't pierce through Lu Chunping. This is incredible. Li Wudi's grasp of strength, hardness and gentleness had reached an exquisite level of perfection. Amazing, it's really amazing. Previously, Zi Yuan and Inspector Ono had fought in the way of spinning tops. Their control of strength had already been an eye-opener for everyone, but at this time, Li Yundong had shown his skill, which was even more exquisite than Zi Yuan's. But after Zhang Lufang sighed, she couldn't help but show a trace of regret and helplessness. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful he is, he can't reverse the situation. This game, we lost. At this time, not only Zhang Lufang but everyone on the field thought that Li Yundong had lost the battle. The combination of magic that the opponent had used was really sinister and hidden to the extreme. Even if they were not convinced, they thought in their hearts, even if I were to go up, I'm afraid I would end up like Li Yundong. This magic can't be broken unless Lu Chunping is killed. Otherwise it can't be broken at all. But can Lu Chunping be killed? It's fine if he is a secular mortal, but he is also a high-ranking official in the system. As the saying goes, killing an official is equivalent to rebelling. If Li Yundong wanted to win, did he have to kill an official and rebel? However, Li Yundong immediately did something that left them dumbfounded. After Li Yundong threw out a few strands of hair and nailed a few holes in Lu Chunping's veins, he immediately shouted and clapped his hands toward him. A majestic force slapped toward Lu Chunping like a mountain and overturning the sea. With a boom, Lu Chunping's body suddenly shook violently, and a few columns of blood shot out from the places where his hair had been tied up like high-pressure water guns. Then Li Yundong shouted at him angrily. This loud shout shook the sky, and everyone on the field was so shocked that their hearts beat violently and their qi and blood fluctuated. As cultivators, they were already like this on the sidelines, let alone Lu Chunping, who was the first to bear the brunt. Everyone saw that Lu Chunping's body trembled as if he had been electrocuted, and then blood slowly flowed out of his 7 orifices. He had been killed by Li Yundong on the spot, and his body, which had become like a demon and a ghost, also returned to its original state little by little. For a moment, everyone was stunned. Even Abe Yuji looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in his eyes. There was shock, admiration, and a faint trace of regret and sympathy. Li Yundong killed a secular mortal. Although he didn't use magic, he used the purest power of jinqi, which was no different from using magic and magic treasures. The only criterion for judging the reason for the heavenly tribulation was whether it was directly killed by the power of jinqi. Once it was determined that it was killed by the power of jinqi, heaven would lock on this power, and then find the user of this power, and send the heavenly tribulation to punish him. All magic and magic treasures were directly activated by the power of jinqi. Therefore, killing with magic and magic treasures would attract the heavenly tribulation, but in fact, killing with the power of jinqi would also attract the heavenly tribulation. Moreover, if it was an ordinary secular person it would be fine, but this person was still an official. In Abe Yuji's view, Li Yundong would definitely have a terrible disaster in the future, and it was even very likely that there would be no such person in the Chinese cultivation world from now on. Abe Yuji stared at Li Yundong for a long time, and then he slowly sighed and said, I lost. As he said this, he slowly walked to the cultivators of various sects in Japan. He had a high reputation in the Japanese cultivation world. As soon as he returned to his side, someone came forward and comforted him. Lord Abe, victory and defeat are common in the military. Don't worry about it. Sanji Tsunekatsu also smiled slightly and said, exactly. We also want to congratulate Lord Abe for removing this great enemy for our Japanese cultivation world. Abe sighed and said, what's there to be happy about when you're prepared and when you're unprepared? It's an unfair victory. I'd rather everyone fight and learn from each other peacefully. There's no need to fight to the death. Si Chiyun, who had been silently watching the field, suddenly said, in that case, Uncle Abe, why were you so insidious just now? Abe Yuji said seriously, since I'm standing on the battlefield, how can I show mercy? Naturally, I have to do everything possible to knock down the strong enemy in front of me. Si Xingguang laughed and clapped his hands. Well said, well said. This is the great Yin-Yang master of our Japanese cultivation world. Hearing this, Si Chiyun seemed to be deep in thought. He looked at Li Yundong with flickering eyes and said in a low voice, unfortunately, I can't fight with him. Although the Japanese cultivation world had lost this battle, Everyone was happy because they knew that Li Yundong would be in big trouble in the future. The people of China would get rid of this terrible opponent for them. Although the Chinese cultivation world had won, many people looked as if they had lost their parents. Su Chan, Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan's faces changed dramatically. Zhou Qin was extremely strong-willed, but at this time she couldn't help but be dazzled. She was so shocked that her body was almost on the verge of collapse. Su Chan's body was almost soft. If it weren't for her master Ao Wushuang supporting her, she would have fallen to the ground in fear. Zi Yuan was the only one who could barely hold on. Her beautiful red lips had been bitten by herself, but she didn't know it. She was just thinking quickly about how to help Li Yundong deal with this disaster. But just as they were panicking, Li Yundong showed a crafty smile at the corner of his mouth. He walked slowly to Lu Chunping, reached out his hand and pressed it gently on his chest. Then, his fingers quickly swept across his body, and a few strands of hair that had been stuck on his body before were taken off. Seeing his actions, everyone sighed inwardly. However, someone with sharp eyes suddenly saw that Lu Chunping actually let out a long sigh, and his chest began to rise and fall again. At this moment, everyone's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Sanjit Tsunekatsu was so scared that he took a step back. As if he had seen a ghost, he stammered, This is impossible? He's not dead? Abe couldn't believe his eyes. He stared at Lu Chunping with his eyes wide open. His mouth was wide open and he couldn't react for a moment. Si Xingguang was stunned for a moment, and then there was a flash of light in his eyes. He clapped his hands and couldn't help shouting, Wonderful, it's really wonderful. Putting oneself on the brink of death and coming back to life, it's too wonderful for words. Chapter 707. After hearing Ise Xinggua's words, not only did other people in the Japanese cultivation world understand, but many people in the Chinese cultivation world also understood. Zhang Lufang was so excited that her pretty face turned red, and her eyes were full of worship and admiration as she looked at Li Yundong. Although Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were surprised that the dead Lu Chunping had come back to life and that Li Yundong had escaped, they couldn't understand why Lu Chunping could come back to life. Deng Yu couldn't help but ask, Shiji Lufang, isn't this Lu Chunping dead? How did he come back to life? Zhang Lufang was so excited that she could hardly control herself. She said quickly, You idiot, that was Li Yundong's trick. It was right. Li Yundong was also good at scheming and trickery. Think about it, in that situation at that time, did you also think that only by killing Lu Chunping could we break the magic of this Japanese? Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, this pair of beautiful sisters, widened their eyes and nodded at the same time, like two chicks pecking rice. Zhang Lufang laughed and said, By the way, I thought the same at that time, and I believe that everyone present thought the same. Li Yundong must have thought the same at that time, so he simply played along with us and tried to shock Lu Chunping to death with a loud shout. And his loud shout could really shock Lu Chunping to death. Not to mention him, I'm afraid that if I were in his position, I would also be shocked to death by Li Yundong. Deng Yu quickly asked, Then why didn't Lu Chunping die? Zhang Lufang said with a smile, Have you forgotten that Li Yundong pierced his opponent's artery with his hair? This is equivalent to poking a few holes in his opponent's body. Didn't you see that when Li Yundong shouted, blood gushed out of these holes? If it weren't for these holes, the qi and blood in Lu Chunping's body would have been shaken back and forth by Li Yundong's loud shout, and he would have been shocked to death. Think about it, why do we have to open our mouths when we hear a loud sound? It's to reduce the damage caused by the echo shock to the body. Deng Yu was a little confused, but her sister, Deng Jiao, had already understood. She looked at Li Yundong in disbelief and murmured, Oh my God, just listening to it makes me feel complicated. How did he think of this at such a critical moment? Zhang Lufang also looked at Li Yundong with great admiration and said with a look of infatuation, Why don't we all say that he is superly? This kind of reaction, this kind of wit, this kind of boldness, is truly worthy of the two words invincible. Deng Yu couldn't help saying, But isn't Lu Chunping bleeding from her 7 apertures? Zhang Lufang giggled. Who says bleeding from the 7 apertures means death? Li Yundong's roar shook Lu Chunping's qi and blood, making it want to rush out, but it couldn't get out from other places, so it could only rush out from the 7 apertures and the wound that Li Yundong had pierced before. So when we saw him bleeding from the 7 apertures, we thought he was dead. In fact, we were all fooled. Deng Yu was still a little puzzled and asked, Then why did Li Yundong press on this guy's body just now? Zhang Lufang laughed and said, You're so stupid. Li Yundong's roar was very powerful. We were all shaken to the point that our qi and blood were unstable. Lu Chunping is just a mortal. His heart must have suddenly stopped beating and he went into shock. Li Yundong just pressed on his chest and stimulated his 5 internal organs with Jinqi so he came back to life in a flash. Only then did Deng Yu understand. She patted her chest and said, "Amazing, amazing. I can't imagine that such a master is my classmate. Oh my god, if I go down the mountain and tell my classmates, I'm afraid they'll think I'm telling a fairy tale. He really deserves to be my idol. He's amazing." The juniors of the cultivation world were chattering on one side, and they were able to describe the situation on the field. Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others felt as if they had gone from hell to heaven. They had taken a roller coaster ride, and they had gone from horror to ecstasy and excitement. Su Chan had been so scared by Li Yundong that she thought she would be forced to separate from him again. For a moment, tears welled up in her eyes. She was afraid that others would laugh at her, so she held back her tears. But at this time, when she saw that Li Yundong had saved a guy who everyone thought was dead in an instant, she immediately burst into tears of joy and tears fell down. Su Chan wiped her tears and smiled like a flower. She said in a low voice, "You're so annoying. You only know how to scare me." Ao Wushuang looked at Li Yunyang with emotion in her eyes and said in a low voice, "You can summon clouds with one hand and rain with another. Good skill, good skill." Li Yundong stood up in the midst of the exclamations of admiration. His face was indifferent, as if he had done something very ordinary. He glanced at Lu Chunping and knew that although the guy in front of him had come back to life, the qi and blood in his body were still chaotic. He couldn't move him easily, so he let him stand on the field like a wooden stake. Li Yundong cupped his hands to the cultivators of the Japanese sects and said in a clear voice, "Who else wants to come up and teach me?" At this time, Li Yundong had won consecutive battles. In the first round, his methods were fierce and violent, which was awe-inspiring. In the second round, he was witty and full of courage, which really opened the eyes of the cultivators of all sects and amazed them. At this time, no matter how unconvinced they were, they couldn't help cheering for Li Yundong on the sidelines. For a moment, the sound on the side peak of Mount Longhu was like thunder, and the applause was endless. The cultivators of the Japanese sects looked at each other with awe in their eyes. Saionji Tsunekatsu's face was solemn. He turned around and said to Ise Xingguang in a low voice, "Xingguang Jun, it's a critical moment now. We must defeat this guy. Otherwise, the humiliation of the Battle of Mount Koya will reappear in front of us." Although Ise Xingguang appreciated Li Yundong's wisdom and courage very much, he also knew that the battle in front of him was no small matter. They couldn't afford to lose. After thinking for a while, he raised his head and said, "This person is the reincarnation of Wisdom King. His spiritual energy is strong and he is full of wisdom. I don't have any good way to deal with him." Ise Xingguang was a famous sage in the Japanese cultivation world, and his cultivation was outstanding. When he said this, many Japanese cultivators next to him were shocked. Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked and cried out, "Are we going to stop here?" Si Chuyun raised her eyebrows and was about to step forward to speak, but as soon as she moved, she was immediately stopped by Ise Xingguang's gaze. Although she was puzzled, she still stopped and looked at the field hesitantly. While she was hesitating for a while, an old voice called out the name of Buddha and said, "Amitabha. In that case, let me go." The Japanese cultivators turned their heads and saw an old monk with gray eyebrows putting his palms together and slowly walking forward. It was Imagawa Kagumo, the leader of the Tiantai sect. Several cultivators of the Tiantai sect immediately said anxiously, "Master, you haven't recovered from your injury. You can't go on stage." Imagawa Kagumo lowered his eyes and said slowly, "If I don't go to hell, who will?" Next to him, a monk who looked to be in his 40s tugged at his robe tightly and shouted, "Master, you're injuring. You can't withstand such a fierce battle anymore. If anything happens to you, who will lead us to seal the mystical silver fox? Master, let me go." Imagawa Kagumo looked at the monk beside him and smiled slightly. "You. Hideyoshi, Li Yunyang is not an ordinary person. Unless your cultivation is higher than his, you will definitely be restrained by the power of his Wisdom King. Your cultivation is not much different from that of Jinrenli. If you go on stage, you will definitely lose. Don't worry, since I'm going on stage, I have the confidence to win. Although the power of Wisdom King is powerful, it's not invincible. I have a way to defeat him." As he spoke, he whispered a few words in Hideyoshi's ear. When the monk named Hideyoshi heard his words, he couldn't help but let go of his hand and sit down cross-legged on the ground. He put his palms together and said, "Master, we'll wait for you here." Then the other monks of the Tiantai sect also sat down cross-legged, put their palms together and said in unison, "Master, we wish you victory." Imagawa Kagumo chuckled and gently stroked their heads with his hand. Then he flicked his sleeves and stepped into the field. Imagawa Kagumo was a famous eminent monk in the Japanese cultivation world. Whether it was the study of Buddhist scriptures, Dharma, or his own cultivation, he had reached an astonishing height. Even many people in the Chinese cultivation world knew his name. Ziyuan was slightly shocked. She widened her eyes and said, "Imagawa Kagumo? He's actually going on stage." Zhou Qin looked at her in confusion. "Is this old monk very famous?" Ziyuan's face was solemn, and her expression was even more serious than when Abe had a reason to go on stage. "This is the master of the Tiantai sect." Zhou Qin laughed. "Master, didn't you defeat the masters of the Shinto path of the Pure Land sect and the Earth Imperial sect? One of them is even the patriarch of the Abe family. This master of the Tiantai sect must be no problem." However, Ziyuan shook her head and said, "No, this Imagawa Kagumo is a master at the level of Thunder Retribution." "A master at the level of Thunder Retribution?" Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and Ruan Hongling exclaimed in unison. They fixed their eyes on the old monk in the field, only to see that the old monk was quite short and skinny. Half of the loose monk robe he was wearing was almost dragging on the ground, as if he was dragging a long red dress. They muttered to themselves, "This skinny guy who can be blown away by a gust of wind, is actually a master at the level of Thunder Retribution?" They had only heard of this master at the level of Thunder Retribution, but they had never seen him. Just how powerful is a master at the level of Thunder Retribution? Can Li Yundong beat a master at the level of Thunder Retribution? Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on Imagawa Kagumo in front of him. He was keenly aware that although his opponent was skinny, his eyes were bright and he could not be underestimated. He bowed slightly and said, "I haven't asked for your name yet." Imagawa Kagumo also put his palms together and bowed. He said very politely in standard Chinese, "I'm Imagawa Kagumo, please give me some pointers." As he said that, he didn't care about the dirt on the ground and sat down cross-legged. Then he pointed at the floor and said with a smile, "World's honored one, why don't we sit down and discuss Taoism and fight face to face?" Although he didn't know what the other party was up to, he was confident that his cultivation was high and his means were excellent. He didn't care what the other party was up to. As long as he could do whatever he wanted, he would let him do whatever he wanted, just let him do whatever he wanted. Li Yundong smiled slightly and also sat down cross-legged. He put his palms together and asked, "How does Imagawa Kagumo want to fight?" Imagawa Kagumo smiled mysteriously and took out a wooden fish from his wide sleeve. He smiled and said, "I want to compete with you in chanting. What do you think?" Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. He couldn't believe his ears. This old monk wants to compete with me in chanting? Is he bullying me because I'm young and haven't read as many books as him? Are you kidding me? The scriptures I've read in the spirit space are probably more than the books you've read. Li Yundong smiled happily and said, "All right, let's compete in chanting then." Imagawa Kagumo saw that Li Yundong had agreed and laughed. He praised, "World's honored one is really bold. I admire you." The two of them were talking seriously, but the people around them didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Some Chinese cultivators laughed loudly and said, "Hey old monk, are you guys out of tricks? You're actually competing in chanting? I'm dying of laughter." "That's right, who doesn't know how to chant scriptures? How are we going to compete in chanting scriptures? See who can chant more fluently? You're so silly. Let's see who can chant until their mouth gets dry. The one who can chant until their saliva runs dry will naturally win." "Huh. Then if their saliva doesn't run dry, won't they keep chanting? Won't we have to wait until the end of time?" "Hee hee, how can that be? Even the Yellow River will stop flowing, let alone saliva." But just as they were discussing, Imagawa Kagumo raised his hand and took out a small mallet from his sleeve. He hit the wooden fish with a thud and started chanting the Dharma Sutra in a serious manner. This sound was originally ordinary, but in an instant the sky suddenly darkened. A large mass of dark clouds quickly gathered in the sky above the side peak of Mount Longhu from all directions. Everyone looked up and saw thunder and lightning rolling in the clouds. Their expressions changed drastically, only then did they understand what Imagawa Kagumo was trying to do. For a moment, everyone looked at Imagawa Kagumo in shock. Was this old monk going to chant in the midst of the thunder? It couldn't be, right? Was he crazy? Li Yundong's expression also changed. He looked up at the dark clouds in the sky and thought to himself, he really is a master of the thunder retribution. He can summon the thunder without making a sound. Amazing. Li Yundong's eyes flashed as he looked at Imagawa Kagumo. He saw that the old monk had his eyes closed as if he was meditating. One of his hands was placed in front of his chest, while the other hand was lightly hitting the wooden fish. He was chanting in a low voice, "Impermanence is the law of life and death. Life and death destroy oneself, nirvana is joy." This was the scripture from the Mahavira Nirvana Sutra. As soon as he finished reciting the scripture, there was a loud bang in the sky. Countless bolts of heavenly thunder suddenly struck down on the dojo. The lightning was dazzling and the electric light was flying. In an instant, Li Yundong and Imagawa Kagumo were engulfed. Chapter 708. The power of the heavenly thunder was so great that it made one's hair stand on end. The power of the heavenly thunder that Imagawa Kagumo had mobilized was so great that it made one's hair stand on end. The moment the heavenly thunder fell, all the hair on Li Yundong's body stood up. The yang spirit in his body suddenly rose into the air, leaped to a place more than 10 meters above his head, and rushed straight toward the heavenly thunder. It was not that Li Yundong wanted to fight the opponent head-on, but when the heavenly thunder struck, he could either dodge it, hide under the protection of a top-notch magic treasure to avoid it, or use the yang spirit to resist it. There was no other way. Although Li Yundong was proficient in all kinds of 5 elements magic, no matter how strong the 5 elements magic was, it was naturally restrained by the heavenly thunder. The power of the heavenly thunder was above any magic. The Samadhi true fire was known to be able to burn everything, and the power of the 9 thunder magic was even greater than it, let alone the heavenly thunder that was even more powerful than the 9 thunder. When a bolt of heavenly thunder fell, no matter how strong his body was, it could not withstand it. Even if he used his jinshin to protect his body, if the heavenly thunder struck him, even if he did not die, he would be half dead. Back then, Su Ling had been so arrogant on the Chindu peak of Mount Huangshan, but when a bolt of heavenly thunder struck him, his body and soul were almost destroyed. Even his jinshin could not protect him. Although Li Yundong had cultivated to the realm of immortal jinshin, he did not dare to use his body to test the power of the heavenly thunder. As soon as his yang spirit rose into the air, Imagawa Kagumo, who was opposite him, also rose into the air and headed toward the heavenly thunder. Imagawa Kagumo's yang spirit rose into the air, but it was a solemn bodhisattva sitting on the lotus throne. Beside the lotus throne, there were lotus flowers with crystal clear seeds. This bodhisattva was wearing a golden gauze red robe, her chest was bare, and her hands were holding the Sakyamuni Buddha seal. Behind her head was a colorful halo, and above the halo were 7 colorful peacock feathers. With a loud bang, Li Yundong and Imagawa Kagumo's yang spirit collided with the heavenly thunder and immediately trembled. Li Yundong's yang spirit was instantly torn into pieces and shattered into countless golden clones. Imagawa Kagumo's yang spirit made a big handprint in his hand and blasted it toward the heavenly thunder. As soon as the two came into contact, the handprint was shattered by the heavenly thunder, and the power of the heavenly thunder was greatly reduced. When it hit Imagawa Kagumo again, his yang spirit only moved a little, and the lotus beside the lotus throne trembled slightly. Su Chan and the others on the sidelines saw that Li Yundong's yang spirit had been shattered in the blink of an eye, and they immediately cried out in fear. Su Chan said anxiously to Ao Wushuang, "Master, can Li Yundong win? This is heavenly thunder." Ao Wushuang's expression was serious. She watched the terrible heavenly thunder fall one by one with fear, but she comforted her, "Don't worry. Didn't Li Yundong go through the heavenly tribulation once? This shouldn't be a problem for him." Hearing this, Su Chan felt a little relieved, but Ruan Hongling, who was beside her, was furious. She suddenly said loudly, "Li Yundong didn't go through the heavenly tribulation alone. Without my Shiji Ziyuan's help, how could he have gone through it? If it weren't for helping him, our Linggong sect would." Before she could finish her words, Ziyuan suddenly turned her head and shouted at her, "Hongling, is this the time to say such things?" Ruan Hongling was frightened by her words and immediately shut up. She looked at the field resentfully. Su Chan looked at Ruan Hongling in confusion. She didn't know what she meant, but Ao Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Ziyuan with sparkling eyes and thought, could it be that, the Tong Tian glass mirror and the purple gold luo jade plate in Ziyuan's hands were broken because of Li Yundong? Well, it's possible. No wonder Ziyuan refused to admit it at the inauguration ceremony. It turned out to be like this. Ao Wushuang guessed in her heart, but she didn't say it out loud. She temporarily suppressed this matter in her heart. Just as they were talking, Zhou Qin suddenly pointed to the sky and said in surprise, "Look." Everyone looked up and saw that Li Yundong's shattered golden body had gathered together in an instant, turning into an immovable wisdom king. What was different from before was that Li Yundong was holding a Vajra wisdom sword and trying his best to chop at the heavenly thunder above his head. Su Chan was overjoyed and said, "Ah, Yundong's yang spirit has recovered again. It's amazing." As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yundong's yang spirit was instantly smashed into pieces. The smile on Su Chan's face froze. Before she had time to worry, she saw Li Yundong's yang spirit return to its original state in an instant. The process repeated. She blinked a few times and Li Yundong was smashed and restored several times. Su Chan turned to Ao Wushuang with a depressed face and said, "Master, what's going on?" Ao Wushuang stroked her head dotingly and shook her head. "You little girl, you don't usually cultivate well. Now that you see such an earth-shattering battle, you don't even know what's going on. You really want to piss me off. After all, you're a seven-tailed fox spirit. How can your knowledge be so poor?" Su Chan blushed and said in a low voice, I'm not ashamed to ask, am I?" Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. Well, you're not ashamed to ask. I can't afford to be asked like this. Su Chan made a face at her and said, "If you don't tell me, I'll ask Sister Ziyuan." As she said this, she took Ziyuan's hand and asked, "Sister Ziyuan, you must know, right?" Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "Li Yundong is in the Jinshin phase. This is what happens when he fights against the Thunder Retribution with his Jinshin. Fortunately, Li Yundong has already comprehended the unity of heaven and man, the 10,000 methods returning to the origin, and the infinite void. Even if the Jinshin is smashed into countless pieces, as long as the true method is still there, his Jinshin can be restored in an instant." Su Chan suddenly understood and said, Isn't that similar to crossing the Thunder Retribution? Then, can Yundong absorb the power of heavenly thunder while crossing the Thunder Retribution? Ziyuan shook her head and said, "It's still winter. The winter thunder has no vitality at all, and he can't absorb any power. Only crossing the spring thunder is the best time." Su Chan patted her head in annoyance and muttered, "Yes, I knew all this before. Now that I've been with you for too long, I've become stupid." Her words made Zhou Qin, Ziyuan, and the others laugh, and the tense and solemn atmosphere of the heavenly thunder had been diluted a lot. They spoke casually, but the people on the sidelines were extremely serious and nervous. They knew that if the two of them could not resist the lightning, it was very likely that they would be affected by it. They would immediately have to run for their lives in all directions like, "It's thundering, it's raining, everyone put away your clothes." Everyone saw dark clouds rolling above their heads and thunder bursting. A wisdom king was broken and restored under the fierce bombardment of the heavenly thunder, and then broken again. The cycle was simply too much for the eyes to take in. On the other side, a bodhisattva was holding all kinds of Taoist seals in his hands in the thunder, remaining motionless. Looking from afar, the side peak of Mount Longhu was flowing with rich brilliance under the fluctuations of these two powerful forces. In the shroud of dark clouds, no one could tell what color they were. Maybe it was red, maybe it was yellow, maybe it was white, maybe it was black. All kinds of colors were intertwined, struggling and moving. Sometimes they scattered like a rainbow falling from the sky, and sometimes they gathered like a rolling python. It was really a fierce battle. Many of the tourists on the main peak of Mount Longhu were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. They stopped in their tracks and looked in the direction of the side peak. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao naturally hoped that Li Yundong could win with overwhelming strength again, but they saw that Li Yundong was actually at a disadvantage at this time. His yang spirit was constantly being split apart, while Jinchuan Xingyun was coping with it with ease. Moreover, although Li Yundong's body was also sitting cross-legged at this time, his expression was solemn and his eyebrows were tightly furrowed. Jinchuan Xingyun was sitting cross-legged on the ground, chanting scriptures while using his yang spirit to resist the heavenly thunder. His expression was calm. Deng Yu couldn't help but say anxiously, "The situation doesn't look good." Zhang Kongyun's eyes were fixed on the field. He sighed and said, "As expected of the leader of the Tiantai sect, as expected of a master of lightning retribution. He can calmly recite scriptures in the heavenly thunder without being disturbed at all, and at the same time he can control the yang spirit to resist the heavenly thunder. This kind of calmness in the face of the heavenly thunder, this kind of cultivation that treats the heavenly thunder as nothing, is really terrifying. Deng Jiao was more attentive. She looked at the bodhisattva transformed from Jinchuan Xingyun's yang spirit and asked in a low voice, "What kind of god is this? Why is it so powerful?" Zhang Kongyun said in a deep voice, "This is the Dragon Tree Bodhisattva." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were confused and said in unison, "Dragon Tree Bodhisattva? What kind of bodhisattva is this? Why haven't I heard of it?" Zhang Kongyun nodded. Just as he was about to speak, Zhang Lufang, who was beside him, said, "Oh, you two rookies, don't you know the Dragon Tree Bodhisattva? This is the greatest Buddha after Gautama Buddha. In the history of Indian Buddhism, he is known as the second-generation Gautama Buddha. His status in Buddhism is equivalent to the status of the second sage of Mencius in Confucianism. The 8 major sects of Buddhism in the Central Plains all recognize the Dragon Tree Bodhisattva as the ancestor." Deng Jiao was surprised when she heard this, but Deng Yu didn't care about this. In her opinion, no matter how great this Japanese bodhisattva was, it was an evil bodhisattva. It was a bad bodhisattva. She made a face and said, "Humph, no matter how powerful he is, he's still a bad guy. This Dragon Tree Bodhisattva doesn't seem to be a good thing either." Zhang Kongyun laughed and shook his head. "Don't talk nonsense. This is just the Dragon Tree Bodhisattva transformed by Imagawa Kongyun, not the real bodhisattva. Moreover, although the Dragon Tree Bodhisattva had many misdeeds when he was young, such as sneaking into the palace with his friends to molest the palace maids, after being discovered, all his friends were beheaded, and he was the only one who survived. After this incident, the Dragon Tree Bodhisattva suddenly repented and entered Buddhism, achieving the supreme Dharma. As the saying goes, the prodigal son repents and becomes a Buddha on the spot. Although I am a Taoist cultivator, I also respect the Dragon Tree very much. You can't be disrespectful to this Bodhisattva." They whispered to each other. At this time, Li Yundong had slowly figured out the trick of resisting the heavenly thunder. In the process of his Jinshin Yang spirit being smashed again and again, Li Yundong clearly felt that it was impossible to resist the power of the heavenly thunder with the power of his Jinshin alone. He had to rely on the power of heaven and earth to resist it. When he was practicing the Vajra longevity skill, he had comprehended the Wuji realm of unity of heaven and man. The moment his Yang spirit was smashed, it split into thousands of clones. Each clone absorbed the chi of heaven and earth and then gathered together. Mount Longhu was a famous place of Lingqi in the world. It was the creation of heaven and earth, the beauty of all living things, and the Lingqi was so heavy that there was no second place in the world. Every time Li Yundong was smashed, the Lingqi he absorbed would increase. Although he was constantly being smashed, his Jinshin was getting stronger and stronger. Everyone saw that Li Yundong's Yang spirit was greenish-black with blue flames flowing around it. 2 completely different breaths came out of his nostrils. One was red and the other was black. He looked angry and ferocious, extremely terrifying. From the beginning, when the Jinshin was smashed, Li Yundong was slowly able to resist the heavenly thunder with the Mahamudra without the Jinshin being smashed. It seemed to take a long time, but in fact it was only a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. Imagawa Kagumo saw that Li Yundong was slowly standing firm in the heavenly thunder. He frowned slightly and made a finger seal. The Yang spirit chanted a mantra and a Mahamudra Kung Fu slapped toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong looked over and saw that the other party's hands were tied outside. His middle fingers were put together vertically, and the upper part of his fingers was curved like a sword. It was the Manjushri Vajra sword seal that symbolized cutting off all karma. At the same time, he saw Imagawa Kagumo chanting the mantra, "Ah, luo, bo, what, that." It was the secret mantra that he was familiar with and had never been taught to outsiders. With a loud bang, a fierce Mahamudra tore through the heavenly thunder and slapped toward Li Yundong's face in the blink of an eye. Li Yundong was shocked. How did this guy know the mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu? And he was so skilled. Li Yundong didn't have time to think. Without saying anything, he immediately put his palms together. His 2 middle fingers were upright, his 2 ring fingers were in the shape of a treasure, his 2 little fingers and thumb were scattered, his left index finger was vertical, and his right index finger was on the tip of his left index finger. He formed the lion speed seal of the immovable wisdom king, which symbolized bravery and invincibility. Li Yundong flipped his palm and used the lion speed seal of the immovable wisdom king to hit the other party's Manjushri Vajra sword seal without showing any weakness. For a moment, everyone's eyes widened and they didn't dare to breathe. They watched as the two golden Mahamudra quickly approached. They were all extremely nervous, waiting for the result of the collision. Would the thunder punishment suppress the Jinshin, or would the Jinshin break the thunder punishment? Chapter 709. On Mount Longhu, dark clouds covered the sky, and lightning flashed like a group of snakes dancing wildly. You're almost there. All the tourists on the main peak of Mount Longhu could not be bothered to enjoy the scenery, nor could they be bothered to burn incense and pray to the gods. They were all staring at the strange and terrifying scene on a distant peak with their mouths agape. Many of them took out their phones and cameras to record the scene. While they were pointing and whispering to each other, there was suddenly a loud bang in the sky, as if there was a violent earthquake. Many people fell to the ground, and the dark clouds that had originally covered the top of the mountain were instantly dispersed. The tourists on the main peak immediately saw a shocking guardian deity standing in the sky, surrounded by blue flames. Not far away there was a Baoxiang bodhisattva sitting cross-legged on a lotus throne. These two gods had only appeared for a moment. Many tourists holding mobile phones and cameras had been too focused on taking pictures, so when their feet suddenly trembled, their hands trembled and they did not manage to take pictures of the scene in front of them. But when they came back to their senses and wanted to take pictures again, the dark clouds in the sky quickly gathered together and became thicker than before. They wanted to see the guardian deity and the bodhisattva again, but they could no longer. Seeing such an abnormal situation, the tourists on Mount Longhu kept exclaiming and pointing at the distant peak. They looked from afar and thought that it was caused by the cumulus clouds and the thunderstorm, but they did not know that it was a fierce battle between the two top cultivators of China and Japan. Although this battle wasn't as intense as the battle with Shota Takahashi, it was still more dangerous than the one he had fought with. Li Yundong and Imagawa Kagumo patted each other from afar. With a loud bang, Li Yundong's Jinshin Yang spirit was shattered in an instant. The moment his Yang spirit was shattered, a bolt of heavenly thunder suddenly fell from the sky and struck straight at the top of his head. Although Li Yunyang was shocked, his reaction was extremely fast. He immediately controlled the countless Yang spirit clones that had been scattered to gather above his head. The moment he gathered them, the heavenly thunder instantly struck. With a loud crack, Li Yundong looked as if he had been struck by lightning. The cultivators of all sects in China were so shocked that they exclaimed in unison. At the same time, the Japanese cultivation world also burst into cheers. However, after this thunderbolt, Li Yundong's body did not tilt as everyone had imagined, and he was struck by the heavenly thunder until he spat out a mouthful of blood. Instead, his whole body emitted countless golden brilliance in an instant, and he looked like he was about to explode. You almost there. Those who reacted quickly immediately understood that Li Yundong had used his Jinshin to protect his body and take the blow head-on, so that his body would not be destroyed by the heavenly thunder. Although he had the protection of the Jinshin, his physical injuries were still serious. A strange and unusual red color suddenly flashed across Li Yundong's face. It was obvious that all the qi and blood in his body had been shaken at that moment, and he couldn't even recite the scriptures in his mouth. Li Yundong was like this, and Imagawa Xingyun was not much better. Previously, he had formed the demon-slaying formation with his disciple to reseal the mystical silver fox. Although he had failed after that, driving this powerful true method had still caused him a violent backlash. At this time, his injuries had not yet healed, and he was fighting with Li Yundong so intensely. His chest was also agitated, and all the qi and blood in his body seemed to be rebelling, running around in the meridians in his body. Unlike Li Yundong, Imagawa Xingyun's face had turned pale. Li Yundong's qi and blood were sufficient, so when the qi and blood in his body were surging violently, his face was as red as Guangong. Imagawa Xingyun's injuries had not yet healed, and he had vigorously mobilized his qi and blood to generate Jinqi and Dharma power. He was already old and he had been injured before. At this time his face was as pale as paper. After the two of them fought head-on, they took a deep breath at the same time and immediately reinvigorated themselves. Once again the two of them made a Mahamudra and slapped each other. This time, Imagawa Xingyun made the outer 5 Cobalt seal, one of the 5 Great Void Bodhisattva hand seals, while Li Yundong made the 3 Cobalt Vajrapani seal, one of the 14 fundamental seals of the immovable Wisdom King. These two Mahamudra were both fierce kung fu. As soon as they came into contact, there was a loud bang as if 2 missiles had collided, causing a violent explosion. The heavenly thunder that fell from the sky was shaken and scattered in all directions. For a moment, many cultivators on the scene were scared out of their wits by the flying heavenly thunder. They all took out their magic treasures to prevent themselves from being accidentally injured. Although the battle between Li Yundong and Imagawa Xingyun did not see any blood, it was as dangerous as fighting with bayonets in a rain of bullets. The slightest carelessness could lead to the destruction of both body and soul. Everyone saw the two of them performing their Mahamudra Kung Fu. On the other hand, Imagawa Xingyun made the 8 characters Manjushri Great Essence Seal, Maitreya Bodhisattva Lotus Palm Seal, Void Bodhisattva Samaya Seal, Vajrapani Karma Seal, Sunlight Bodhisattva Mahamudra Karma Seal, Vajrapani Dharma Bodhisattva Mahamudra Karma Seal. On the other hand, Li Yundong quickly made the single Cobalt Seal, Treasure Mountain Seal, Flaming Wheel Seal, Suwa Seal, and 3 Cobalt Vajrapani Seal. The 2 Mahamudra blasted each other, and the rumbling sound in the air was endless, mixed with the bursts of thunder. The air was almost shattered. Many cultivators with lower cultivation could not help but cover their ears, afraid of the sound. Almost there, the tourists on the main peak in the distance looked over and felt that the roar between heaven and earth was like the roar of the gods, like the roar of the earth. It really made people feel the fear of the end of the world. Although Imagawa Xingyun's cultivation was higher than Li Yundong's, he was injured after all and he was old. Although his cultivation Jinchi was hidden deep in the 3 Danshuns at this time, he had to defend against the heavenly thunder in the sky and fight against Li Yundong's yang spirit. The Jinchi that he usually stored had long been used up. At this time he had to force his chi and blood to transform into Jinchi to fight against Li Yundong. As the saying goes, the fist is afraid of the strong. It was the same for cultivation. Li Yundong was only about 20 years old at this time. He had a body reborn from the Jindan, and he was also a child's Yuanyang body. When he was in the Zhuji phase he had also gone through a lot of hard training. His chi and blood were abundant, and there was no one else in the world who could compare. Although Li Yundong's cultivation was not as good as Imagawa Xingyun's, his physical body was much stronger than Imagawa Xingyun's. On one side was an old man who was about to die, and on the other side was a young man who was in the prime of his life. Under the tug of war between the two, the situation slowly began to turn. Although Li Yundong had been at a disadvantage before, at this time with his young and strong capital, he began to slowly suppress Imagawa Xingyun. In the beginning, the Mahamudra that Li Yundong used was simple and short Mahamudra Kung Fu in order to be fast. But now, the more he fought, the more valiant he became. The Mahamudra in his mouth became longer and longer, and the power of the Mahamudra in his hands became stronger and stronger. The originally calm dragon tree Bodhisattva was also shaken to the point that her body was slanted, and there was a faint sign that she was about to be shattered. The cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world changed their expressions, and their eyes were filled with worry. At this time, a few monks of the Tiantai sect sat cross-legged on the ground and began to loudly chant scriptures. It was the Dharma Sutra, which was known as the King of Scriptures. I saw that you were extremely tired and wanted to retreat, so I used the power of convenience to create this city. You are diligent, and you should share the most precious treasures. I will also do the same for all teachers. As soon as they began chanting, the dragon tree Bodhisattva, who had been on the verge of collapse in mid-air, suddenly shone with a golden light. In an instant she sat firmly on the lotus throne, and with great momentum she launched a fierce counterattack toward Li Yundong. The cultivators of the various Chinese sects on the sidelines were not fools. At this time, seeing this situation, how could they not know what had happened? They all cursed, "Shameless! How dare you help outside? Despicable! Isn't it a one-on-one fight? Why did you use the magic formation to help? Are you bullying us because we don't have any help?" Although Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school had a grudge against Li Yundong, at this time, they were facing a great enemy and had a common enemy. Naturally, she could not watch Li Yundong be defeated. Zhang Ling shouted, "Despicable villain, using such means. Even if you win, do you feel proud?" Jingyi disciples formed the formation. There were many disciples of the Jingyi school. When they shouted in unison, their voices immediately drowned out the chanting of the monks. Each of them held a sword in their hand and stared at the cultivators of the various sects in Japan. The cultivators of the various sects in Japan were not to be outdone. They glared at each other, and the shadows of their swords and knives clashed. At this time, Li Yundong knew that if he did not fight with all his might at this time, he would definitely lose this battle. He suddenly shouted loudly, and the one-headed and two-armed Akalanatha instantly transformed into the Dharmakaya of Akalanatha with 3 heads and 6 arms. The 3 vertical pupils on his forehead opened angrily, and his 6 hands kept pinching the Taoist seals, shooting toward Imagawa Kagumo like a series of cannons. At this time, all of Li Yundong's jinqi, qi and blood had surged to the peak state. Both his physical body and yang spirit had reached the highest realm he could reach at present. In the past, when he fought with others, he had almost always relied on his fierce attacks to quickly defeat the enemy. He had never fought such a high-intensity battle of attrition like now. In such a high-intensity battle, if it had been anyone else, they would have long been exhausted. However, Li Yundong's jinqi and dharma power seemed to be inexhaustible. The more he fought, the stronger and more vigorous it became. The more he fought, the more excited his own body became. The qi and blood in his 5 internal organs were rolling like crazy motors, madly producing blood and circulating blood. The fresh blood was quickly transported to his whole body and turned into strength. Soon, it gathered with the essence qi in his lower dantian to form blood qi, strength, and essence qi. Finally, the 3 qis condensed in the upper dantian. At this time, Li Yundong had really lost his temper. He had fallen into a state of madness. Without waiting for the people of Jingyi school to help, he began to fight back crazily. In Imagawa Kagumo's opinion, at this time, his opponent should temporarily avoid his sharpness and adopt a defensive stance. After slowly exhausting his external help, he would slowly counterattack, especially since Li Yundong was a Jinshin master. His realm was lower than his, so there was absolutely no reason for him to take the initiative to counterattack. However, Li Yundong was like a newborn calf that was not afraid of tigers. He was full of spirit and courage. He repeatedly counterattacked in places that no one could think of and dared to think of, achieving a shocking reversal. A battle between masters only lasted for a moment. Imagawa Kagumo did not expect it, and his Jinshin was suffocated by Li Yundong. The faces of the few monks who had formed the formation to help Imagawa Kagumo became redder and redder in front of Li Yundong's sudden and violent attack. Their faces were so red that it seemed as if blood was about to drip out. Although the cultivation of the few monks was not low, they could not compare to Li Yundong, who had vigorous jinqi. Moreover, although the power of the formation was great and could support Imagawa Kagumo from afar, the biggest weakness of the formation was its shortcoming. The power of a formation did not depend on the most powerful person in the formation, but on the weakest person in the formation. Once the weakest person could not hold on first, it would immediately cause a flaw in the perfect formation, causing the entire formation to collapse. After a few rounds, Li Yundong made 3 big hand seals, including the Flaming Devil Heavenly Hand Seal, the Vairocana Dharma Boundary Seal, and the Heavenly Drum Thunder Sound Buddha. They could topple mountains and overturn seas, and they slammed down like a storm. Immediately, a master with yang spirit cultivation screamed. In an instant, all the meridians in his body exploded with a bang, and his entire body exploded into a bloody man. His scream immediately caused the formation to shatter. The dragon tree bodhisattva, who was sitting on the lotus throne, also swayed. The lotus throne was shattered by Li Yundong's great Vajra wheel seal, and he fell to the clouds. Imagawa Kagumo's body also spat out a mouthful of blood. His body tilted and he fell to the ground. Just as he fell, the heavenly thunder in the sky suddenly stopped bombarding. The thick dark clouds slowly drifted away, and the sky became clear and bright again. The roar of the heavenly thunder was hidden in the clouds, and the deafening sound of the big hand seals also dissipated in the vast sky. The side peak of Dragon Tiger Mountain was extremely quiet. Everyone looked at a young man who was panting violently in the field, dumbfounded. They all knew that this earth-shattering battle would definitely be recorded in the history of the cultivation world of China. In this battle, Li Yundong used the power of Jinshin to break the power of the opponent's thunder punishment, and truly established his reputation as invincible. Today, I am heading north to the capital. The time is too tight and there is only one night watch left. I will return from Beijing on the 3rd, and I will make up for it in the future. Please forgive me. Chapter 710. When the Japanese Tiantai sect monks saw Imagawa Kagumo falling to the ground, some of them who could still move immediately rushed to him and held him up, crying out loud. Imagawa Kagumo spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as a sheet as he fell to the ground. After he was supported by the middle-aged monk, he faintly felt as if someone was shouting something at him. He struggled to open his eyes and forced a smile at the middle-aged monk in front of him. He reached out his hand and caressed the monk's head. Then he recited a passage from the Dharma Sutra, the Holy Lord, the King of Dharma, comforts the infinite. When I die you shall not be afraid. After reciting, Imagawa Kagumo panted and said, after I die, I can appoint Takacho Yukino as the sect leader. Please support me. Unfortunately, none of you can truly inherit my legacy. It's a pity that I'm leaving. Also, Hideyoshi, remember to restrain your disciples when you go back. Don't let them take revenge for me. As long as this person doesn't become an immortal in China and doesn't die, none of you are allowed to step on this land. Remember, remember, remember. The middle-aged monk named Hideyoshi was shocked and said angrily, Sect leader, you'll be fine. What do you mean by that? Why can't we take revenge? What? Imagawa Kagumo smiled and said in a low and slow voice, now that I've seen the world, I've become a Buddha in peace. I'm happy that I've gained something good. The masses are always troubled, the blind have no teacher. They don't know the path of suffering, they don't know how to seek relief. The long night increases evil and reduces the number of people in the heavens. From the underworld to the underworld, I'll never hear the name of Buddha. He recited the Dharma Sutra in a low voice, and his voice gradually became softer. When he reached the last word, the smile on his face froze and he stopped breathing. He passed away on the spot. Hideyoshi could faintly feel that the scripture recited by his master before he passed on seemed to have a deep meaning, but at that moment, his heart was filled with grief and he did not have time to think about it. He knelt down in front of Imagawa Kagumo, prostrated himself on the ground and started crying loudly. The rest of the monks from the Tiantai sect who had not fainted also burst into tears. For a moment, the sound of crying could be heard in the Longhu Taoist field. Li Yundong had used the power of Jinshin to break the thunder retribution. The cultivators of all sects in China were both shocked and delighted. Although there were cultivators of the Tiantai sect who were crying and crying, they were all smiling and whispering to each other about the earth-shattering battle just now, exchanging their own experiences with each other. Zhuangzi looked at Li Yunyang in awe and said in a low voice, Jinshin breaking through the thunder tribulation happened more than 200 years ago. I didn't expect that I would be able to witness it with my own eyes today. Li Wudi lives up to his reputation. Mao Yuchang looked at the man who was younger than her with a complicated gaze. She opened her mouth to say something but in the end she didn't say anything. Li Yundong was panting heavily in the field. This battle was the most dangerous and intense one he had ever had since he started cultivating. His Jinshi was strong and his spiritual power was powerful. He was unparalleled in the world. Even when he had been fighting with people on Mount Tianlong, he had never felt tired. But at this time his whole body was trembling slightly. He could even clearly feel that his 2 waste kidneys had been drained to the point of pain. It was obvious that the previous fight had consumed a lot of his essence, qi and blood. He was already a little overdrawn. Li Yundong took a deep breath and used his breathing to slowly adjust the chaotic qi and blood in his body. His originally flushed and abnormal face gradually calmed down. At this time, Li Yundong recalled the battle just now and couldn't help but have a trace of doubt in his heart. Logically speaking, the other party was also in the Thunder Retribution realm. Even if he couldn't hold on, there was no reason for him to lose so quickly. Especially with the support of the magic formation, he was immediately defeated after a series of fierce attacks. Li Yundong had an old injury, and he had taken advantage of it? Li Yundong was about to ask when he saw Hideyoshi pick up the golden body of Imagawa Kagumo and glare at Li Yundong fiercely. He wiped away his tears and strode to the side of the field. Li Yundong glanced at him and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He had no intention of stopping him. Although the two sides were enemies, Li Yundong still admired Imagawa Kagumo's cultivation. Although he didn't know who Imagawa Kagumo had learned the Mahamudra Kung Fu from, the other party's mastery of the Mahamudra Kung Fu was deep and his skill was pure. It was above and not below him. Ziyuan, who was at the side of the field, saw this scene. She sighed softly and said, "Alas, Li Yundong has made another enemy. Xinyan Tantrism, Pure Land True Sect, and Tiantai Sect are the 3 strongest sects of Japanese Buddhism. He has offended all of them. How can this be?" Zhou Qin had a strong personality. She raised her eyebrows and said, "We'll deal with it when it comes. Are we afraid of these little Japanese? If they want to fight, then we'll fight." Ziyuan shook her head and said, "It's not good, it's not good. As the saying goes, it's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. These 3 sects almost represent the power of the Japanese Buddhist cultivation world. No matter how powerful Li Yundong is, it's impossible for him to withstand their continuous challenges in the future. If this goes on, there will be endless troubles." If Li Yundong still wants to cultivate quietly, it will be wishful thinking. Zhou Qin was a little unconvinced and argued, is it better to lose? There's no point in giving in to these Japanese. Only by beating them into submission, defeating them, and beating them into submission will they truly be at peace. As she said this, she turned to Su Chan and said, Su Chan, tell me who's right between us. Su Chan looked at Ziyuan and then at Zhou Qin. Suddenly she smiled and said, both of you are right and wrong. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan both looked at her curiously and asked, what do you mean? Su Chan smiled and said, in my opinion, as the saying goes, if one's heart is in one place, there will be 84,000 tribulations. In the world of the three realms, there is only one true method. It's useless to say this now. It's important to see what Yundong thinks, says and does. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan both laughed. Zhou Qin pointed at Su Chan and said with a smile, ha, isn't this the sutra? After watching a battle, you can actually learn and apply it on the spot. Amazing. No wonder Master likes you so much. You're so sweet and good at talking. Ziyuan also smiled and looked at Li Yundong. Although her expression was no longer solemn, there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. Su Chan giggled and said, not at all. I still have to learn more from Sister Ziyuan and Sister Zhou Qin. By the way, why didn't Imagawa Kagumo's yang spirit come out after he died? Seeing that Li Yundong had won consecutive victories, Zhou Qin also relaxed a lot. She said to Su Chan with a smile, I don't know either. You have to ask our great Jinren Ziyuan. Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, Buddhist cultivators don't pay attention to ascension. Apart from fighting, they almost never leave their yang spirits unless their physical bodies are destroyed. Otherwise, even if they die in meditation, the yang spirits will remain in their physical bodies until they are cremated. Only then will their yang spirits be thrown back into the samsara realm to be reincarnated. Because of this, many eminent monks' golden bodies are cremated after they die, and there are often many relics left behind. This is the product of the cremation of the yang spirit when it wraps around the body. Only then did the two of them understand. When they looked at the field again, Hideyoshi walked to the side of the field with the golden body of Imagawa Kagumo in his arms. After a few loud words with Saionji Tsunekatsu, he and the other monks of the Tiantai sect walked to the side of the field with the injured disciples and recited scriptures for Saionji Tsunekatsu. Saionji Tsunekatsu looked at them worriedly. 2 of the 3 pillars of Japanese Buddhism had been lost, and only the Xinyan Tantrism had not yet made a move. They were the only ones left, and it was difficult for them to do anything alone. At this time, when the cultivators of various sects in Japan saw that Imagawa Kagumo, a master of thunder retribution, had died in front of them, their hearts were so heavy that they couldn't speak. After a long time, a cultivator from the Dashang sect of Japanese Shintoism said angrily, Are we going to stop here? Everyone, it doesn't matter if we are defeated, but our Japanese cultivation world has been defeated by the same person one after another. Can we bear such humiliation? Is there no one else who will rise up again? They were really shocked by Li Yundong's fighting methods. In the first round, Li Yundong had shown that he was not afraid of any Buddhist magic power and that his jinchi was strong and fierce. In the second round, Li Yundong had shown his exquisite fighting methods and outstanding wit. In the third round, Li Yundong had simply defeated the strong with the weak. His jinshin had broken the thunder retribution. This battle not only showed Li Yundong's wisdom and courage, but also let everyone see the majestic and vigorous jinchi of Li Yundong. In their opinion, without a cultivation as vast as the sea, it was absolutely impossible to persist in such a fighting environment, let alone defeat a master of thunder retribution. Fighting with such an opponent, it was really frightening. Seeing that there was no response from the crowd, the cultivator's face was full of grief and indignation. He then shouted loudly, Are we going to let Li Yundong use our failure as the cornerstone to build his invincible reputation? Don't you feel ashamed? I don't believe that Li Yundong is really invincible, Li. At this time Isi Chuyun, who was like an iceberg, said, I saw that Li Yundong was still overdrawn in the battle just now. At this time, if there is another master, he will definitely not be able to hold on. Even if he wins again by luck, it will definitely be a Pyrrhic victory. If he fights in a wheel formation, he will definitely be defeated. When the cultivators of the various sects in Japan heard this, their eyes lit up. They all knew that although Isi Chuyun's character was as cold as ice and she didn't like to talk much, as long as she spoke, she would definitely be right. The cultivator who had spoken before suddenly became spirited and said loudly, Miss Chuyun is right. Let me pave the way for you in the next round. Immediately, someone advised, Otsuka, Your cultivation is no match for Li Yundong. It's dangerous for you to go on stage. Otsuka said angrily, compared with the face of our Japanese cultivation world, my life is nothing. After that, he was about to go on stage, but as soon as he moved, he saw an arm in front of him. It was Sayonji Tsunekatsu who had stopped him. Otsuka was stunned. Just as he was about to scold him angrily, he heard Sayonji Tsunekatsu say, Otsuka, I have a feud with Li Yundong. Leave this to me. Otsuka stared at him for a long time, then bowed and said, I wish you victory. Sayonji Tsunekatsu put his palms together and returned the salute. Thank you, thank you. Although Ise Xingguang appreciated Li Yundong at this time, it was a matter of the overall situation. He didn't dare to be careless, so he warned Sayonji Tsunekatsu, Changxing, Li Yundong is almost an arrow at the end of its flight. When you go on stage you must attack fiercely. Remember, don't give him a chance to breathe. Se Chuyun also warned, Changxing Jun, Li Yunyang is the reincarnation of Wisdom King. Only people with a high cultivation level can beat him with the power of Buddhism. Your cultivation is about the same as his. Don't compete with him in terms of Dharma power. Focus on close combat. Sayonji Tsunekatsu respectfully clasped his hands together to return the salute. After thanking them, he walked to Kaisai Hikaryuni's side and knelt down. Kaisai Hikaryuni stretched out his hand and stroked his head. After that, Sayonji Tsunekatsu jumped up and strode into the field without looking back. He shouted at Li Yundong, Li Yundong, do you still remember me? Do you dare to fight with me again? Before Li Yundong had time to speak, the cultivators of the various sects next to him all shouted, shameless, taking turns to fight. Do you dare to be more shameless? Why don't you swarm up together? Little Japan is little Japan. Their means are despicable and endless. Jinren-Li, don't be provoked by him. At this time, Ziyuan also said to Li Yundong in a loud voice, Jinren-Li, let me fight in this game. However, Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on Sayonji Tsunekatsu. With his intelligence and reaction, how could he not know what the other party was planning? He thought to himself, this time, I have offended so many Japanese cultivation sections. In the future they will find trouble with me. Although I am not afraid, the people around me will inevitably be implicated. If I want these Japanese to not dare to retaliate in the future, I must beat them until they are convinced. In the future, when they mention my name, they will tremble all over and their legs will tremble. Thinking of this, Li Yundong snorted coldly and said in a loud voice, Sayonji Tsunekatsu, a defeated opponent, dares to be so arrogant? Come here, let me see what progress you have made. Someone asked me if I would update on the 3rd. Of course not. These days I will try my best to ensure that the updates are normal, but I will make up for the missing updates when I come back. There will be updates in the evening. Chapter 711. Ever since Sayonji Tsunekatsu had been defeated by Li Yundong with one palm, he had learned from the pain. His originally flamboyant and violent temperament had also become much calmer. Although he had been enlightened by the Mandala 5 tribes of Kaisai Hikari and his cultivation had improved greatly, he did not dare to be careless when facing Li Yundong again. 9078. 8C34685078678X0U30. 9C7098 Sayonji Tsunekatsu deliberately provoked Li Yundong with arrogant words, but he didn't expect that Li Yundong would really accept the challenge. He had prepared a lot of words, but at this time he didn't need them. Under the ecstasy in his heart, he became calmer and calmer. Many cultivators on the sidelines shouted at Li Yundong, Jinren-Li, don't be provoked by this little Japanese. You have won 3 games in a row. Even Vajra Arhat can't stand it. Come down and take a rest before fighting. There were also cultivators who shouted at Sayonji Tsunekatsu, King Japanese, you only know how to take advantage of this kind of advantage. What kind of ability is that? If you have the ability, let Jinren-Li rest for 3 days. 3 days is not enough, at least 3 years. 3 years? In 3 years, Jinren-Li has already cultivated to the golden immortal realm and ascended. I'm afraid that this little Japanese will never be able to take revenge for the rest of his life. Sayonji Tsunekatsu turned a deaf ear to these curses. He looked at Li Yundong and said in a deep voice, Jinren-Li, you attacked me in the previous battle. In this battle I must get justice. His words were righteous. Some people who didn't know the truth thought that Li Yundong had used disgraceful means to deal with him. For a moment, some cultivators on the sidelines looked at each other and cursed in a much lower voice. Li Yundong looked up and laughed. What a joke. It's really a thief crying to catch a thief. Sanjit Tsunekatsu, I haven't seen you for a few days. I don't know if your kung fu has improved, but your eloquence has improved a lot. Do you want to compete with me in eloquence? Well, I'll accompany you. The two of them engaged in a battle of words and attacked each other. It seemed to be a harmless exchange of words, but every single word struck directly at the other's Tao heart. Once their wills wavered, their cultivations would be greatly reduced. But at this time, Li Yundong raised his voice and said, Sanjit Tsunekatsu, if you are afraid, I will stand still and let you hit me 3 times first. How about that? Li Yundong's words caused another uproar outside the arena. Everyone looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape. They were not fools. Naturally, they could see Li Yundong's current situation. Not to mention letting Sanjit Tsunekatsu hit him 3 times, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. 3 times? Even a Vajra made of iron or a Luohan made of copper would be smashed into pieces. However, Li Yundong had won 3 games in a row, and his momentum was so strong that no one dared to underestimate him. They all looked at Li Yundong in surprise and doubt, speculating about the truth of his words. Was he bluffing and deliberately mystifying, or was he trying to lure the enemy and repeat the same trick? Li Yundong had asked Takahashi Shota to cut himself 3 times, but Takahashi Shota had been shocked to death. Now Li Yundong had asked Sanjit Tsunekatsu to hit himself 3 times. What would the result be? Would he be shocked to death as well? Did Li Yundong still have strength left? Everyone was talking and guessing. Sanjit Tsunekatsu also looked at Li Yundong with a vigilant face. His eyes stared at Li Yundong like a hawk and a wolf, as if to see through his false reality. However, there was always a faint smile on Li Yundong's face and his eyes were bright. He was as steady as a mountain and as deep as water. The wind didn't move him and the waves didn't stir him. There was no clue at all. Could it be that this Li Yundong really has strength left? Or is this just a psychological war? What if he really has strength left? Such a thought involuntarily emerged in Sanjit Tsunekatsu's heart. As soon as this thought came up, it took root like a devil, lingering and unable to be dispelled. But after all, he was one of the best of the younger generation of Xinyan Tantrism. After being defeated by Li Yundong, although there was some shadow in his heart, his character became more and more firm. He took a deep breath, calmed down, and forced the distracting thoughts out of his mind. Seeing that he couldn't get any advantage from talking, he stopped arguing with Li Yundong. He said in a deep voice, Jinren Li, I won't take advantage of you if I can't kill you with words. Let's have a fair competition. Many cultivators in the Chinese cultivation world on the sidelines booed when they heard this. How shameless you are. Sanjit Tsunekatsu was like a clay doll with no self and no living beings. He didn't seem to hear what was going on around him. However, Li Yundong smiled and said, well, bring it on. Sanjit Tsunekatsu saw that Li Yundong was no longer forcing him to fight 3 times first. His heart suddenly moved and he thought, Li Yundong must be an arrow at the end of its flight. He is bluffing. His eyes suddenly lit up and he was secretly happy. Just as he was about to step forward and attack, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, like the angry eyes of Vajra. His eyes spewed out 2 sharp eyes like lightning, shooting at him like sharp arrows. Before, Li Yundong's momentum was really light, like a gentle breeze, but at this time, it suddenly turned into a storm, thunder and lightning. Especially this stare, the contrast was so great that it really had the terrible momentum of Guangong doesn't open his eyes, but when he opens his eyes, he wants to kill. Sanjit Tsunekatsu was shocked and shouted in his heart, he still has strength left. He was really luring the enemy just now. This devil, how could he still have strength left? The cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world were also tongue-tied, looking at Li Yundong as if they were looking at a devil. Se Chuyun, who had previously asserted that Li Yundong was an arrow at the end of its flight, was also stunned. His cherry mouth opened into a shape, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. Everyone saw that Li Yundong didn't move much, but his body flew out like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Sanjit Tsunekatsu. His momentum was fierce and explosive and he moved like a bow, like thunder. Li Yundong's figure instantly rushed in front of Sanjit Tsunekatsu. His body was like a bow, his 5 fingers opened, and like a devil's claw, he hit Sanjit Tsunekatsu's face with both hands. When Li Yundong had not yet reached the Zhuji phase, he had often fought hand-to-hand with others, especially when he had just started cultivating. At this time he was fighting hand-to-hand with his opponent with the cultivation of the Jinshin phase. The strength of his power was really shocking. His 5 fingers were as strong as iron claws, and the strength of each finger penetrated through the fingertip. With one claw, even the steel plate would be scratched 5 holes, let alone the flesh. Saionji Tsunekatsu didn't expect Li Yundong to have such power. He was shocked and quickly retreated to avoid the edge. But as soon as he retreated, Li Yundong's feet were fast, step by step. He immediately turned his wrist, and the back of his hand was like a steel whip, slamming towards Saionji Tsunekatsu's throat. Saionji Tsunekatsu was also a fighting master, proficient in all kinds of ancient Japanese martial arts. He saw that Li Yundong was already close to him and began to fight hand to hand. His momentum was fierce, and it really should be the saying in the Fist Sutra: the good fighter has a short momentum and his momentum is fast. Saionji Tsunekatsu also knew that he could not keep retreating like this. Otherwise, once the other party's momentum soared, he would definitely lose. He gritted his teeth, immediately raised his hand, and hit Li Yundong's raised armpit with a knife in his hand. But at this time, Li Yundong seemed to have expected him to do this. He immediately raised his other hand and put it on his arm. As soon as their arms touched, both of them trembled at the same time. Li Yundong's wrist suddenly turned, and his 5 fingers were like hooks. He grabbed Saionji Tsunekatsu's wrist and pulled his arm down in front of him, not letting him move again. Saionji Tsunekatsu immediately raised his other hand and hit Li Yundong's face with a whip elbow. At this time, Li Yundong raised his hand again and touched his arm. In the same way, his 5 fingers grabbed the opponent's elbow and pulled the opponent's hand down again. He pulled the opponent's hands down and put them on his chest. At this time, both of them were holding hands. It seemed to be a tie, but many people in the Japanese cultivation world exclaimed, "Not good. Chongqing, be careful." Although Li Yundong was holding the opponent's hand with both hands, because Saionji Tsunekatsu's hands were crossed in front of him, one hand was pressed under the other hand. At this time, Li Yundong instantly released his hand that was pressed under the pressure, raised his hand and hit Saionji Tsunekatsu's head with his elbow. These 3 consecutive attacks were as fast as thunder and interlocked. The Japanese with discerning eyes immediately exclaimed, "Yama's 3 points. Baji fist." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were on the sidelines, looked at the field nervously and blankly. They heard many Japanese people shouting, "Baji, Baji?" They couldn't help but be curious. Deng Yu asked, "Shiji Lufeng, what are these Japanese shouting? What is Baji?" Zhang Lufeng stared at the field intently for fear of missing a movement. She explained without turning her head, "It's the 8 extremities fist of Tai Chi brings peace to the world in literature, 8 extremities fist of martial arts." Deng Yu asked curiously, "Is Baji fist very powerful? Do these Japanese also know about it?" Zhang Lufeng said quickly, "Whether it's the Japanese cultivation world or the Japanese martial arts world, they all recognize Baji fist as the most powerful fist technique in the martial arts world of China. In the Republic of China, Li Shuwen, the Baji Grandmaster, had 3 disciples. The eldest disciple, Huodienga, served as the martial arts instructor and guard officer of the last emperor, Puyi. He didn't leave until the puppet Manchukuo. His last disciple, Lu Yunxiao, served as the instructor and guard officer of Chiang Kai-shek's bodyguards. So, you know the power of Baji fist, don't you?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao exclaimed in unison and looked at Li Yundong with widened eyes. Li Yundong's whip elbow blasted towards Saionji Tsunekatsu. Saionji Tsunekatsu's hands were pressed down by one of Li Yundong's hands. It was too late for him to dodge or defend. He could only condense all his jinchi on his forehead. He lowered his head and hit Li Yundong's elbow with an iron head skill. With a bang sound, the 2 bodies collided, but the sound of metal and stone was heard. Their bodies suddenly shook, and they were shaken by their respective forces and took a step back. Although the forehead was the hardest bone of the human body, and Saionji Tsunekatsu had also practiced hard outer kung fu, the head was the most vulnerable part of the human body. When he collided with Li Yundong, there was a sudden dizziness in his brain, as if there was water flowing and shaking, and his ears were buzzing. He was about to retreat in shock, but he suddenly saw a strange and enchanting blush flash across Li Yundong's face, but Li Yundong quickly took a deep breath, and his face quickly returned to normal. Saionji Tsunekatsu was stunned, but soon his heart moved. He found that Li Yundong was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight. At this time he must have forced his strength to launch such a fierce blow. In ecstasy, Saionji Tsunekatsu immediately dispelled the idea of retreating, and stepped toward Li Yundong. He bowed his knees, his 5 fingers slightly bent like a palm, like a fist but not a palm. It was the killing skill of Kyokushin Karate, Overlord Fist. But as soon as he punched out, Li Yundong immediately put his hand on his. After blocking his punch, he immediately stepped forward, raised his right hand high, and hit his opponent's chest with his elbow. Then the back of his hand, like a steel whip, hit Saionji Tsunekatsu's face. Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked. He saw that Li Yundong's punch was even fiercer than the previous Yama's 3 points. He was shocked and angry. He couldn't help roaring with grief and indignation. This bastard lied to me again. He didn't dare to take the move and retreated again. Li Yundong was unforgiving. He made 2 moves, one after another. Although his whip hand was dodged by his opponent, after the whip hand hit nothing, he immediately turned his wrist, and his 5 fingers were like tiger claws, clawing toward his opponent's face. It was the ultimate killing skill of the 8th Supreme Grandmaster, Divine Spear Li Shuwen, who was invincible in the world. Tiger climbing the mountain. Well, thank you for pointing it out. Some of the mistakes in the book have been corrected. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Chapter 7:12. The unique skill of Bajiquan, Fierce Tiger Climbing the Mountain, was not only powerful and fierce, but also had many changes, especially this move, which was overbearing and arrogant. No matter how the opponent dealt with it, it only cared about hard. When Li Yundong's claw came, there was a sudden exclamation from the sidelines. Zhou Qin and the others only saw that their blood was boiling and their eyes were shining. She had once fought hand-to-hand with a master of Bajiquan and relied on an extremely brutal and tough fighting method to win. Zhou Qin was young and vigorous, and she had become famous in the world with this battle. It was not that she didn't have the idea that Bajiquan is only SOSO. But at this time, when she saw Li Yundong's Bajiquan, it was really as fierce as a tiger, as powerful as a dragon, and unstoppable. She thought to herself, if Master had been on the field at that time, I was afraid that this move would have knocked me down. There would have been no chance for me to fight desperately. Su Chan clenched her fists and stared at the field nervously. She whispered, hurry up. 1 hit and the opponent will collapse, just 1 more hit. She saw that Li Yundong was like a maggot attached to a bone, staring at Saionji Tsunekatsu and constantly fighting close to him, but Saionji Tsunekatsu was always able to avoid the fatal blow at the most critical time. She couldn't help but be so anxious that she wished she could go up and catch Saionji Tsunekatsu, who was like a loach. Ziyuan stared at the field, and her expression became more and more serious. After watching for a while, she suddenly whispered, oh no. Li Yundong can't hold on. Zhou Qin turned her face in surprise and said, isn't Master suppressing the opponent? Why can't he hold on? Ziyuan clenched her fists and said nervously, an arrow at the end of its flight can't wear silk. This is also why Li Yundong can still suppress Saionji Tsunekatsu after 3 consecutive battles. If it were another person, they would have long been short of breath, deficient in qi and blood, and their bodies would have collapsed. While she was talking, Li Yundong's offensive on the field had indeed slowed down. Although Saionji Tsunekatsu had been chased by Li Yundong like a storm and his body had been hit in many places by Li Yundong, he had been a master of the Jinshin phase before he was defeated by Li Yundong for the first time. After that, he had been enlightened by Kaisai Hikaryuni and his power had greatly increased. How could he be defeated so easily? At this time he saw that Li Yundong's offensive had slowed down again, but he had learned from his mistakes. He didn't attack rashly anymore, but tentatively launched a counterattack against Li Yundong. With this counterattack, Li Yundong seemed to be unable to hold on and immediately retreated. Saionji Tsunekatsu was overjoyed and once again tentatively pressed forward. Li Yundong retreated again. At this time, even the cultivators on the sidelines could see that Li Yundong was on the verge of exhaustion. Many people in the Chinese cultivation world looked at the field with sighs and said, alas, Jinrenli can't do it. I'm afraid he's going to lose this game. Sigh, Li Wudi isn't invincible after all. How can anyone win so many battles in a row without losing? Yeah, look at his opponents. 3 golden bodies and 1 lightning tribulation. It's terrible. Jinrenli shouldn't have been in the limelight. He should have let someone else do it. Someone else? Who else can do it? Who dares to say that they can win against Saionji Tsunekatsu? The cultivators on the sidelines whispered to each other, but the situation on the field suddenly changed again. After Saionji Tsunekatsu chased after Li Yundong and attacked him several times, he found that Li Yundong really didn't have any strength left to attack again. His breathing was also extremely fierce, especially his face was purple and red, and his forehead was densely covered with sweat. Saionji Tsunekatsu no longer had any doubts and immediately rushed forward to attack wildly. Everyone saw his two arms waving a few shadows, as if a few arms had grown out of thin air on his shoulders, pressing down on Li Yundong and attacking wildly. Su Chan was so shocked that her face changed dramatically. She was about to exclaim, but she saw that Li Yundong didn't retreat but went forward. He turned a blind eye to Saionji Tsunekatsu's fierce attack. With a spin of his feet, he once again got close to Saionji Tsunekatsu. His body leaned toward Saionji Tsunekatsu, his shoulders were fixed and he backhanded. It was one of the 8 unique skills of Bejiquan. Overlord breaks the reins. At this time, everyone on the field thought that Li Yundong's defeat was certain, but Li Yundong was seeking life and death, seeking victory in defeat, and once again making waves in an impossible place. Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked. Just as he wanted to retreat, Li Yundong slapped him in the chest with his backhand, causing him to roar wildly. There was a sweet taste in his throat, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Saionji Tsunekatsu also punched Li Yundong in the shoulder. There was a cracking sound in Li Yundong's shoulder, and one of his arms hung down softly. Li Yundong didn't even snort. Instead, his eyes became sharper and fiercer. He couldn't rush forward, and his other hand was like a tiger's claw, digging towards Saionji Tsunekatsu's chest. Saionji Tsunekatsu was so shocked that he didn't dare to fight with Li Yundong again. He retreated like crazy and Li Yundong had already stuck to him. His feet were like a shadow, and his remaining arm was like a storm, pounding towards Saionji Tsunekatsu's chest. Everyone only heard a puff-puff sound as if a boxer with both hands was hitting a sandbag. The sound was so close and fast that no one could tell that it was the sound of an arm blasting out. Everyone was frightened and thought, Li Yundong's one arm is so fierce. If it were 2 arms, I'm afraid that Saionji Tsunekatsu would have been turned into meat paste, right? At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu could no longer get rid of Li Yundong. He struggled to support himself and retreated. Just as he was about to retreat to the side of the field, he suddenly saw a figure standing on the edge of the field. His heart moved and he immediately flew toward the figure. At this time, Li Yundong had almost used up his last breath. If this breath could not kill the opponent, then he would be killed by Saionji Tsunekatsu. He immediately chased after him like a shadow, turned his body, and turned his hand to slap towards Saionji Tsunekatsu. But as soon as he slapped out, he saw Saionji Tsunekatsu's body suddenly spin and push Lu Chunping, who had been standing on the side of the field, in front of him. After Lu Chunping was saved by Li Yundong, he had been standing on the side of the field like a wooden stake. At this time his qi and blood were in disorder, and he needed to rest quietly. He could not move easily, so the cultivators on the side of the field did not care about him. Even in the previous battle with Imagawa Kagumo, the flying thunder and lightning had fortunately not hit his head. But at this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu saw that he could not stand it anymore, so he took him as a hostage and pushed him to Li Yundong's palm. At this time, the cultivators of the Chinese cultivation world on the side of the field were shocked with anger. Although they hated Lu Chunping very much, if Lu Chunping died here, there would be a terrible earthquake in the cultivation world. Saionji Tsunekatsu's killing with a borrowed knife was insidious, shameless, and despicable to the extreme. Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others cried out in horror at the same time. The cultivators of other sects also shouted angrily, shameless. Li Yundong didn't expect Saionji Tsunekatsu to be so despicable. Although he wanted to continue to slap the guy in front of him and Saionji Tsunekatsu into meat paste together. But Li Yundong's reason told him that he could not slap down. If he did, he would immediately cause a great disaster and from then on he would have to wander in Jianghu. It was not terrible for him to wander around, but did Su Chan want to live such a life with him? Didn't he promise her that he would make her happy? Even if she was willing, what about Ziyuan? What about Zhou Qin? What about the other people of the Fox Zen school? Would they be implicated by him? At this moment, countless thoughts flashed through Li Yundong's mind. Li Yundong gritted his teeth and forcefully retracted the palm that was going to kill him. The force that he had sent out was retracted, which was no different from being hit by the other party. But at this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu was extremely hidden and sinister. From under the armpit of Lu Chunping, who was standing like a wooden stake, he fiercely stabbed Li Yundong in the chest. Sanjit Tsunekatsu became a monk at the age of 6. At the age of 8, he was selected as a monk to guard the temple. At the age of 10, he began to travel around the world to cultivate heart. By the age of 20, he had become the youngest and most promising guardian of the temple in Jinyan Tantrism. After so many years of cultivation, his whole body had been polished to be as hard as steel. If he hadn't met Li Yundong, a big pervert, he wouldn't have been beaten so badly. At this time he suddenly counterattacked. He really had the courage to succeed or die. In addition, his palm went out from under Lu Chuanping's armpit. It was hidden and sinister, and even ghosts and gods couldn't defend against it. And Li Yundong was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and he abruptly took back the palm he had sent out. Under this situation, even if he was a god, he wouldn't be able to escape this. Everyone only heard a puff sound. Li Yundong's chest was stabbed by Sanjit Tsunekatsu with a hand knife, as deep as his palm. Sanjit Tsunekatsu was ecstatic. He was about to give Li Yundong another fatal blow, but just as he wanted to pull out his palm, he saw Li Yundong's eyes staring at him. His eyes were red like a wild beast, and one hand grabbed his wrist to prevent him from pulling it out. At this time he flew up and kicked toward his temple. Sanjit Tsunekatsu tilted his body and wanted to dodge, but he found that Li Yundong's foot was just a feint. He grabbed his hand and pulled it back. A huge force pulled his feet, and his body involuntarily rushed toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, which pierced Sanjit Tsunekatsu's chest from the side of Lu Chuanping's neck like a sharp arrow. Then he slapped Sanjit Tsunekatsu's forehead with his palm. Sanjit Tsunekatsu had never expected that Li Yundong would be able to fight back in such a situation, and the power was even more fierce than before. He felt a pain in his chest and he roared angrily at Li Yundong's blood arrow. He subconsciously reached out to cover his chest. Seeing Li Yundong's palm coming at him, he wanted to dodge, but he found that the qi and blood in his body were in a mess. The blood arrow that Li Yundong had spat out had hit his huagai acupoint. The qi in his body was in a mess and he couldn't move. There was a flash of despair in Sanjit Tsunekatsu's eyes. He watched helplessly as Li Yundong's palm came closer and closer and slapped toward his forehead. With a puff sound, Li Yundong's palm abruptly passed Lu Chuanping and hit Sanjit Tsunekatsu's forehead. Sanjit Tsunekatsu's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe that Li Yundong could kill him in such a situation. Sanjit Tsunekatsu's whole body shook, and a stream of blood burst out of his body. All the blood in his body exploded, and he slowly fell to the ground. At this time, Li Yundong's chest also had a big hole and blood was flowing out. His body shook a few times and it seemed that he was about to fall to the ground, but after he staggered he stabilized his body. At a glance he saw that Sanjit Tsunekatsu had been killed by his palm. He smiled and glanced at the side of the field. He saw that at this time, everyone on the field was looking at him with their mouths open. The little girl had already burst into tears and rushed toward him crazily. Behind her was a nervous Ziyuan and an angry and anxious Zhou Qin. Yundong, are you okay? Su Chan ignored the eyes around her and rushed to Li Yundong like crazy. She wanted to see the wound on Li Yundong's chest. She sobbed and said, "Don't scare me. You can't have anything happen to you." Li Yundong forced a smile and gently wiped the tears on Su Chan's cheek with his bloody fingers. He smiled gently and said, "Don't be silly, I'm fine." But before he could finish his words, his eyes suddenly went black and he finally fell down on his back. All the cultivators on the side of the field exclaimed at the same time. They all stared at Li Yundong with their eyes wide open. This invincible Jinshin of Li Yundong, whose momentum was like a rainbow and whose figure was like a dragon, had finally broken. This man who seemed to never be knocked down had finally fallen. Chapter 7:13. Seeing this scene, Su Chan was so shocked that she almost fainted. Ziyuan, who was beside her, immediately grabbed Li Yundong's arm and skillfully reconnected his dislocated arm with both hands. Then she poured her jinqi into Li Yundong's body without hesitation. 9078. 8C34I6H507 82678X0U30. 9C7098. At this time, the cultivators of Jingyi School, Chuanjin Dragon Sect and other sects all gathered around. For a moment, the cultivators of all sects abandoned their sects and looked at Li Yundong, whose chest was bleeding with concern and anxiety. Zhang Kongyun quickly took out a jade bottle from his sleeve and handed it to Ziyuan. He said in a deep voice, "Ziyuan, hurry up and stop the bleeding." Ziyuan reached out and took it without looking at it. She pulled out the stopper of the bottle and poured it toward Li Yundong's chest. The elixir, which was worth 1,000 gold per gram, was immediately diluted by the blood. At this time, Ziyuan was worried and confused, as if she had lost her usual calmness. She hurriedly covered the wound on Li Yundong's chest with her hands, trying to suppress the blood from flowing out. However, Li Yundong's chest had been pierced by Saionji Tsunekatsu's palm. The wound was as big as a crocodile's mouth, so how could it be covered by her hands? Ziyuan covered Li Yundong's chest with both hands, but blood kept gushing out of her chest. She used her fingers to point at Li Yundong's acupoints to help him stop the bleeding, but Li Yundong had been too exhausted before, and his qi and blood had already been boiling like a volcano. At this time, the injury on his chest was serious, and the chaotic qi and blood in his body had a place to go. They kept flowing out. How could acupuncture points stop the bleeding? Seeing that she couldn't stop the bleeding, Ziyuan's face suddenly turned pale, her hands trembled slightly, and beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. At this time, Mao Yucheng of the Maoshan sect also squeezed in front of her. She didn't care about comparing with Ziyuan. She took out a purple gold jade bottle from her arms and said anxiously, "Try this. This is the jade-breaking rejuvenation ointment of our Maoshan sect." Ziyuan took it without saying a word and poured it into Li Yundong's wound without any hesitation. But as soon as she poured it, the blood still couldn't stop flowing. At this time, everyone was in a panic. Ziyuan, who was usually calm, was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Zhou Qin's eyes were red, and she glared fiercely at the cultivators of various sects in Japan. She made up her mind that if anything happened to Li Yundong, she would rush over and fight with them. Anyway, if Li Yundong died, she wouldn't live either. At this time, the little girl suddenly quieted down. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and said in a low voice, "Yundong, you won't leave me alone, will you? If you leave, she will be all alone and pitiful. If someone bullies her in the future, who will take care of her? Do you have the heart to do that?" As she spoke, the little girl's tears fell. Her tears dripped on Li Yundong's palm, like warm spring water moistening the cracked earth, making Li Yundong, who was in a coma, vaguely feel that someone on the distant shore seemed to be calling him. Li Yundong only felt that he was trapped in a dark and chaotic world. He could vaguely hear the voices of the people around him, but they were all talking at once and he couldn't hear them clearly. But at this time, Li Yundong suddenly heard a clear and magnetic middle-aged man's voice coming from a very distant place. "Li Yundong, where did your qi go? Where did your oneness of heaven and man and void in action go?" This voice was like a bolt of lightning cutting through the sky in the darkness, suddenly illuminating Li Yundong's mind. His heart skipped a beat, and he tried to control his scattered yang spirit Jinshin again, slowly summoning them back from all directions. During this process, Li Yundong faintly felt that he seemed to have entered an indescribable realm. It seemed that he had become one with the surrounding world. The vitality and spiritual qi condensed on every flower, grass, tree, and wood in Mount Longhu resonated with him. The surrounding aura, which contained the essence of heaven and earth, slowly flowed into his body. As soon as Li Yundong tried it, the qi and blood in his body immediately became under control. It no longer ran around wildly, and the flowing blood immediately slowed down. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were so anxious that they were crying, immediately became overjoyed and shouted, Okay, quickly apply the medicine." It stopped. Ziyuan looked and saw that the blood flowing from Li Yundong's wound had slowed down a lot. She was overjoyed and immediately poured the rest of the medicine in the bottle over. At this time, Li Yundong's chest had become like paste, so sticky that Ziyuan didn't care about the dirt. She applied the powder evenly on Li Yundong's chest with both hands. After her hands were covered in blood, Ziyuan saw that Li Yundong's wound was finally no longer bleeding. She breathed a sigh of relief, her whole body almost as if it had lost all its strength. When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Li Yundong's blood had stopped flowing, they couldn't help cheering. It's okay. His internal organs weren't hurt, and the bleeding has stopped." At this time, Li Yundong also slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the girl's pretty face, which was covered in tears. Li Yundong forced a smile, raised his hand to wipe away her tears and said with a smile, "Fool, how could I leave you behind?" Su Chan smiled, but tears rolled down her cheeks. She held Li Yundong's hand tightly with both hands and pressed it against her cheek. It seemed that as soon as she let go, Li Yundong would disappear. She wanted to say something, but as soon as she opened her mouth, her throat was so choked with sobs that she couldn't say anything. Li Yundong smiled and helped her stroke the hair on her temples. His gaze turned to Ziyuan, only to see that this fairy-like figure was looking at him with a smile on her face, and there were tears in her eyes. Li Yundong smiled at her and said softly, "Sorry to trouble you." Ziyuan shook her head quickly, but turned her face to the side and secretly wiped away her tears. Li Yundong finally looked at Zhou Qin and smiled. "You didn't want to do something stupid just now, did you?" Zhou Qin's eyes turned red and she almost cried. She said, "Master, if anything happens to you, I will kill all these Japanese people to avenge you." Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't be silly. If anything happens to you, who will inherit my legacy? Who will pass on my story to future generations?" When Zhou Qin heard this, she couldn't help but cry. She thought about the scene when she had just met Li Yundong. From his fierce battle with the gangsters at school, to his limelight on the stage, to his battle with Lin Youfa at the school gate, to his lightning strike He Shao, to his fame at the Taoist assembly, to his defeat of Masako Tachibana on Mount Koya, and to his fight against the 3 Jinshin and 1 Thunder Tribulation on Mount Longhu, which shocked the Japanese cultivation world. Zhang Sanfeng, Wang Chongyang, Qin Pu, Bai Chan, and Zhang Buduan were all famous cultivators in history. Their deeds had been passed down for thousands of years, and they were still being told by people today. However, the once young boy in front of her had walked step by step. At this time he had grown into an indomitable great cultivator. Who would remember the story he had experienced in the future, and how would it be recorded? For a moment, Zhou Qin couldn't help thinking about it. At this time, the people of the Japanese cultivation world couldn't help falling into a depressing silence. Although the cultivators of various sects saw Li Yundong fall to the ground, they were not happy at all. They knew that although Li Yundong was seriously injured and fell to the ground, he had almost completely destroyed the morale of the Japanese cultivation world. He made them realize one thing. In the future, as long as this person was in China, they would always be shrouded in the shadow of this man, and they would never be able to rise again. For the extremely proud and conceited Japanese cultivators, how could they tolerate it? Even Abe, who had always opposed coming to China, said in a sad and heavy voice at this time, "What should we do now? Our failure has created a legend. This legend will be passed down in the world forever, and we will always be the supporting characters and footnotes of that tragedy and shame." As soon as he finished speaking, the cultivator named Otsuka of Deshang sect shouted angrily, "No, we must kill Li Yundong. Otherwise we will bear this shame forever." Abe was furious and scolded, "Kill him? Then you'll have to bear the infamy of 1,000 years. Otsuka roared loudly, "I'd rather bear this infamy alone than let such a great enemy live in the world." He knelt on the ground with a plop, his back straight, his eyes sweeping across the people present sharply, and he shouted sternly, "I've made up my mind. I've decided to challenge him again. If I'm unfortunate enough to die in battle, I hope that someone will stand up for me. Everyone, we are insignificant and our reputation is insignificant. But the reputation of the Japanese cultivation world must not be ruined in our hands. Everyone, this is a national war and we can't afford to lose." As he said this, he bent down heavily, then raised his head with a resolute face. He strode onto the field and shouted in a very stiff Chinese language, "Li Yundong, are you still alive? If you're not dead, do you dare to fight again?" His words made all the cultivators in the Chinese cultivation world fly into a rage. Even an experienced and prudent cultivator like Su Yangzi couldn't help but fly into a rage. He shouted angrily, "You Japanese are too shameless. How can you say such words? There's no need for Jinrenli to deal with people like you. Come on, let's have a few moves." Zhang Kongyun, Zhang Ling, Du Fei, Wei Qing, Deng Yu, Deng Jiao and the others were even more furious. They shouted and cursed loudly. For a time there was a lot of noise and curses on the field. However, Big Mound's expression did not change, as if he could not hear the crowd's tide-like curses. His eyes were like a wolf and an eagle, staring at Li Yundong as if he was staring at his prey. How could Li Yundong not know what the other party was planning? He smiled slightly, but before he could speak, Ziyuan beside him couldn't help grabbing his arm. Li Yundong turned his head and saw that the beautiful woman was biting her lip hard, her eyebrows full of pleading. She shook her head gently at him as if she was begging him not to go on the field again. Zhou Qin was also shocked and said in a trembling voice, "Master, this is their provocation. Don't fall for it." Li Yundong smiled and turned to look at Su Chan, only to see that the little girl's tears were rolling down her face. She was just looking at him and didn't say a word. Li Yundong couldn't help but ask with a smile, "Girl, why didn't you persuade me?" Su Chan wiped her tears with the back of her hand, forced a smile and said in a choked voice, "Yundong, I know what you're thinking. You want to get rid of them once and for all, don't you? You're afraid that we will be implicated in the future, aren't you? If you want to go, go ahead. Anyway, you know that I will always be behind you. No matter what you do, I won't stop you." It was like this in the past, it's like this now, and it will still be like this in the future. Although there was a hole in Li Yundong's chest and he had lost a lot of blood, his heart was warm. He looked at Su Chan gently and reached out to gently caress her face. He looked at her as if there was no one else around and said softly, "Girl, you know me best." He chuckled and said to Su Chan softly, "Help me up." She hastily wiped away the tears on her face and quickly wiped them on her clothes. Then she gently helped Li Yundong to his feet. At this time the onlookers were all shocked. They looked at Li Yundong in disbelief as if they couldn't believe their eyes. This guy who almost died just now actually wants to go on the field? Is he crazy? Zhang Kongyun couldn't help but persuade him, "Jinrenli, there are still cultivators from other sects who can go on the field. Don't force yourself." Mao Yuchang, who was sharp-tongued, also tried to persuade him, "Jinrenli, don't try to be brave anymore. If you go on the field again you will die." However, Li Yundong smiled and said softly, "The other party challenged me by name. How can I avoid the battle?" As he said this he slowly walked to the field. He looked up and down at the grave with a sarcastic smile on his face and said softly, "Hey, a mere young spirit master wants to take advantage of us? Come on, bring it on." Although Li Yundong's words were soft, everyone heard them clearly. For a moment the field was extremely quiet. The cultivators of all sects in the Japanese cultivation world also looked at Li Yundong with solemn expressions. Their gazes were extremely complicated, with shock, surprise and a hint of deep awe. Big Mizuka looked at Li Yundong standing in the field. His handsome face was pale and he was holding his chest with one hand. His body was a little shaky as if he could be pushed down with a finger. However, he felt that this man who was about to fall at any time, was as majestic as a mountain, standing in front of him like a towering mountain whose peak could not be seen. Big Mizuka was shocked and thought to himself, "This man is seriously injured to such an extent, but he still has such power. If he survives this, the Japanese cultivation world will really be unable to raise our heads in front of him in the future. Such a terrible enemy must not be allowed to live in this world." Big Mizuka's heart shook, and he let out a beast-like roar. He held a long spear in his hand and slammed the end of the spear heavily on the ground. With a crisp sound, two sharp forks immediately popped out of the tip of the spear. It was the king of spear techniques in Japanese ancient martial arts, treasure yard style cross spear. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.